Chapter 1180. Captain Xie, do you have something on your mind? Xie seemed to have something on his mind after he came back from the battlefield. His eyebrows were almost twisted into a knot, and he was very worried. Han Yu was sensitive enough to notice this, so he asked quietly. Xie came back to his senses and subconsciously raised his vigilance. When he realized it was Han Yu who asked him, he finally let go of his guard. Military advisor Han. He didn't want to answer, but since it was Han Yu, he could confide in him. After all, he trusted Han Yu. It's nothing. It's just that the soldier with the silver spear that I met today, I always felt that he looked familiar. More importantly, the spear technique he used seemed to be the unique technique of the Xie family. The spear technique of the Xie family is not taught to outsiders except for the direct male descendants. Han Yu asked, Captain Xie, are you sure that the spear technique that he used is unique to the Xie family? Xie nodded with certainty. The Xie family was different from other aristocratic families. They were a family of martial arts, and the whole family was full of martial arts. Many of the children in the family had to play with a small wooden spear as soon as they could walk. The foundation of martial arts also started at a young age. They were good at spear techniques and used other weapons very well. When Xie started practicing martial arts, he was not even as tall as the special wooden spear in his hand. The spear technique of the Xie family had long been integrated into his bones and blood. Even if he was blind, he would be able to recognize Li Yun's moves after 2 moves. It was impossible for him to make a mistake. However, he didn't say it out loud. If Han Yu wasn't trustworthy, he wouldn't have told him. Han Yu said, Lu Shi doesn't have many generals. Apart from her, there is only one other person who is good at using the spear, Li Yun. Li Yun? I've heard of him. Xie recalled and said, considering his age, appearance and skills, he should be the one who intercepted me just now. Han Yu continued, Li Yun was born in Fengyi County, Wanzhou, Dongqing. He seemed to be the adopted son of a peasant family. He has nothing to do with the Xie family of Gongning. The 2 families had nothing to do with each other. Are you sure? Xie looked confused. If that's the case, why does he know the spear technique of the Xie family and look so familiar? Ever since the incident with eldest uncle Xie Qian, the Xie family had been quiet. The disciples of the Xie family would not leave Yangning County easily. With Li Yun's skills, he would not have been able to master it without diligently practicing for 17 to 18 years. In other words, if there was a disciple of the Xie clan teaching him, then it would definitely be a direct descendant disciple that stayed outside for a long period of time and rarely returned to the clan. Xie went through all the relatives in his mind, but he couldn't find anyone who fit the criteria. If there was no war, perhaps I could go up to him and ask who his teacher is. As a descendant of the Xie clan, he had to ask about it, or else it would be hard to explain to the clan. Han Yu said, maybe there will be a chance in the future. Xie could only agree absent-mindedly. At the same time, Li Yun looked as if he had just suffered a stroke. He gulped down a large bowl of water, and only then did he manage to suppress the raging fire in his chest. What a lecher! Li Yun said angrily, how could that person be my cousin? Compared to Xie's confusion, Li Yun knew the relationship between the 2. Before he met Xie, he had a good impression of the Xie clan, but now it was like he had swallowed a fly. Was that Xie an adorable fool? On the battlefield, knives and swords had no eyes. He dared to tease him. Li Yun regretted not poking holes in his opponent's eyes. No, I think he used his actions to prove the blood relationship between the 2 of you. Jiang Pingji's eyes were bloodshot and she didn't pay attention to anything else. But she still had the audience in the streaming room. The salted fishes had already told her about what had just happened. She had to admit that if they weren't family, they wouldn't enter the same house. These 2 were really interesting. Whether it was Xie's, you look so good, I seem to have seen you somewhere before, or Li Yun's, my lord is such an imposing man, yet you dress up as a woman, I'm not as good as you, they were both naturally adorable. Could it be that this thing was passed down from their ancestors? As they spoke, the military doctor came in with a medical box. General, please take off your clothes and examine your injuries. Jiang Pingji wanted to leave. After all, the group of salted fishes in the streaming room were already salivating for Li Yun to take off his clothes. If she didn't leave, she could guarantee that the group of salted fishes would lick through the screen. As the lord, she had the obligation to protect the integrity of her subordinates. My lord, do you need me to contact him? Li Yun didn't understand Jiang Pingji's pity for him. Instead, he called out to her. Jiang Pingji had no choice but to stop and turn to look at Li Yun. The lad threw his empty water pouch aside and lifted his hand to untie his heavy blood-stained armor, revealing his blood-stained shirt. It looked scary, but most of the blood belonged to someone else. Li Yun had only suffered some superficial wounds. His muscles and bones weren't hurt. Contact Xieze? For what? Jiang Pingji was stunned. Li Yun said, to instigate his rebellion. Just like military advisor Meng Heng and Ye Sun. As he finished speaking, he looked at Jiang Pingji with a gaze full of anticipation. Whatever military advisor Meng Heng could do, he could do it too. Jiang Pingji was speechless. What happened when she wasn't paying attention? Why did Li Yun learn to be evil without a teacher? Your situations are different. You can't be mentioned in the same breath. Moreover, you and Xieze aren't friends. It's true that you are cousins, but Xie Qian has been expelled from the Xie family. It's still a question whether he recognizes you. Xieze is Su Bei's brother-in-law. In terms of relationship, Su Bei is naturally closer. How are you going to instigate his rebellion? Jiang Pingji laughed involuntarily. It's not that I don't believe you. It's just that your temperament is so upright. This kind of work that requires mental and physical energy isn't suitable for you. Don't let yourself be used by others before you can instigate others to rebel. Li Yun frowned. My lord isn't like Su Bei. How can you be so easily deceived? Jiang Pingji laughed involuntarily. Li Yun's main point was really confusing. The idle spectators licked Li Yun's upper body while feeling resentful that he didn't live up to their expectations. Lao Siji Lianmeng, silly boy, the streamer is mocking you for being simple-minded. Why are you so stubborn? Every time they saw the streamer teasing the little angel Li Yun's mother fans and milk powder fans were worried sick. How could Li Yun not know? However, he knew that his lord had a generous personality. Otherwise, she wouldn't joke around with her subordinates. He could clearly distinguish whether the meaning of her words was malicious mockery or a kind joke. Jiang Pingji laughed. Of course I'm not Su Bei. As they spoke, Jiang Nongqin said that she had something important to discuss with her. What is it? Jiang Pingji asked. Jiang Nongqin's expression was solemn as she said, we don't have enough sutures for the wounded soldiers. We also urgently lack medicine and pure water to treat wounds. During a war, there weren't many soldiers who died on the spot. Most of them died because they couldn't receive medical treatment after the battle. Therefore, the medical logistics was especially important. Once medical treatment was in place, the number of deaths would be greatly reduced. Jiang Pingji had already formed a relatively complete medical logistics team. The death rate had reached new lows. In a sense, the importance of medical logistics was comparable to the importance of military provisions. Nothing has been sent over from Hu County? Jiang Pingji frowned. Jiang Nongqin said, it hasn't been sent over. I'm worried that the transportation line has been disrupted again. Chapter 1181. Jiang Pingji said, the lives of the soldiers are more important. If you have no choice, use boiled water instead of pure water. In ancient times, medical technology was simple and crude. People were ignorant and backward. They did not know that water sources in the wild were not clean. They only judged whether the water was clear or not. Most of the soldiers drank water directly from the river without any other considerations. If they boiled it before drinking, how much firewood and charcoal would be wasted? Most of the soldiers used the water source near the military camp to clean their wounds. However, Jiang Pingji had set a rule early on. She would rather spend more military funds and manpower. The soldiers' drinking water had to be boiled before drinking. The water used to clean the wounds was boiled or distilled water, which was the pure water that Jiang Nongqin mentioned just now. The weapons used by the soldiers were not clean. Many of them had the smell of copper and rust. It was very easy for the wounds to be infected. It was not easy to extract pure water. In order to save money, most of the time it was used to treat dirty wounds with large areas. If the wounds were minor or the condition was very optimistic, boiled water would be used. The chances of infection and pus would be much lower than normal. No matter what kind it was, there was an additional process to make it. It required a lot of wood and charcoal. Jiang Nongqin thought for a while and nodded. I understand. The suture could not be made on the spot, but they could use thicker hair to temporarily replace it. In the past, there was a shortage of materials in the war. They dealt with it this way. The only headache was the medicine for external injuries. Perhaps the heavens heard Jiang Nongqin's distress. The medical supplies that were scheduled to arrive that day arrived on the third day. However, they were in a sorry state. It looked like they had been ambushed. Jiang Pingji had to ask. The commander in charge of transportation was in fear and trepidation. He was so anxious that his forehead was sweating. He had been promoted from an ordinary soldier to a sergeant. Later he was promoted to a sergeant with military merits. Now he was a commander in charge of 100 people. Although he was elevated among ordinary people, he never thought that he could talk to the Lord. He was so anxious that he was speechless. Jiang Pengji saw his embarrassment and said gently, "Don't rush. Tell me slowly." The commander said, "My lord, we were ambushed by the enemy on the way. In order to protect the goods, we had to make a detour." Fortunately, he was a local of Hu County. Before he joined the army, he was a peddler who sold groceries from south to north. He was familiar with all the routes. Of course, he was proud and afraid at the same time. He even bit his tongue when he spoke too hastily. His brown-black face was filled with anxiety. Even though they successfully arrived at the front lines when the enemy ambushed them, they took away a truck full of items. There were 2 boxes with a total of 200 rolls of suture thread, 1 box of anesthetics for external injuries, and 2 boxes of pure water in large glass bottles. Counterfeiting was more expensive than several carts of military supplies. Jiang Pengji said, "Enemy? Whose soldiers?" "They were disguised as bandits. I couldn't tell where they came from and their weapons didn't have any insignia." The captain thought for a moment and added, "But those weapons are of excellent quality. How can ordinary bandits have them? He must be some vassal in disguise." Jiang Pengji said, "You're not bad. Where are you working now?" He was still able to calm down when he was ambushed by bandits and immediately chose to take a detour to protect Big Head. Although it was a waste of time, he also managed to preserve the items. His merits outweighed his faults, so he deserved to be rewarded. Jiang Pengji did not lack scholars at the moment, but she lacked generals. She should promote more new people to prevent a shortage of talents in the future. If he could maintain this position in the future, he might even be promoted again. Jiang Pengji planned to change the military system after her forces stabilized. The military positions had to be clearly defined. Most of the 5 countries in the world continued the military system of the previous dynasty, Xia. Whether it was the title or the positions, it was somewhat messy, and the division of labor was not clear. No order meant chaos. If she let it go, sooner or later there would be trouble. That was one reason. The other reason was that Jiang Pengji did not know how to reward the people in the tent. She could not send people off with property deeds or gold, silver, and jewelry every time, could she? Once or twice was fine, but if she did it too many times, it would inevitably give people the illusion that she was not very sincere. The captain said excitedly, "I'm now working under the commander's tent." "Well, you've done well. Continue to work hard in the future." "Yes." This young uncle had a silly smile on his face as he floated out. A cart of items was gone, but there were still many medical supplies left. If they used them sparingly, they could still last for a long time. "Remember this. I'll get it back from Huang Bogeo in the future," Jiang Pengji said with a cold smile. There was no one in the tent. No one answered. Only the salted fish in the streaming room knew that Jiang Pengji was talking about them. As the streamer's temporary secretary, the salted fish puffed out their chests proudly. The red scarves around their necks seemed to be brighter. On the other side, the group of bandits transported the items away. "It's a pity that we don't have enough people. Otherwise, we could definitely take down those 100 people. Chapter 1182. An item used by the military doctor to treat the wounded? Is there a need for these threads? What is the purpose of the water in the bottle? The crowd did not understand medicine, but they knew the general process of a doctor's diagnosis. No one had heard of needles being used to treat a patient. Qing Jing said, "According to the secret agent's report, these are sutures used to stitch up wounds. They're probably used to speed up the healing of wounds?" It said that this water is extremely precious and pure. Unless it's a serious illness, it's not used easily. I don't know the rest. He did not understand the technique of Qi Huang and had never dabbled in medicine. He could not explain the more specific principles. However, one thing was certain. Jiang Pengji had used these things to save a large number of wounded and sick people. The death rate of the soldiers was the lowest among the feudal lords. They did not know the secret behind it, but with these things they would be able to decipher it one day. Using this to stitch up wounds? Like a woman sewing rags? The faces of the group of generals turned green when they heard this. They were not afraid of being stabbed by knives, but when they thought of the thin needles piercing through their skin and flesh, they all began to tremble. Were they going to treat their injuries or aggravate their injuries? They would die of pain. They had never seen or heard of such a strange medical skill. Qing Jing said, "That's what the secret agent said. We'll have to ask the military doctor about the specifics." Although this kind of medical technique sounded frightening and absurd, Jiang Pengji had used it for many years. The results were obvious to all. That being said, they still politely declined this kind of medical skill. Qing Jing consulted Huang Song. After obtaining his approval, he handed over the cart of medical supplies to the military doctor for research. Looking at the situation on the battlefield, Su Bei's side is in a disadvantageous position. Huang Song had been frowning for the past few days. He and Su Bei were interdependent. If Su Bei fell, it would not be beneficial to him. Yumo, do you have a brilliant plan to break out of this situation? Huang Song looked at Qing Jing expectantly. It could not be said that breaking up and obstructing Jiang Pingji's rear supply line was ineffective, but it was far from the victory he had expected. Local battles could still be useful, but when it came to the overall situation, such small skirmishes would have little impact. Qing Jing had been thinking about this problem for the past few days. Now he had some ideas. Just as he was about to speak, a voice came from outside. Report. The messenger had arrived. Huang Song frowned and said, "Come in. What's the news from the front line?" The messenger reported, "My lord, Zhangzhou's East Gate County has lost and fallen into the enemy's hands." Zhangzhou's East Gate County? Huang Song couldn't react for a moment. After a while he asked in astonishment, "Isn't Dongmen County currently in Su Bei's hands?" Qing Jing said with certainty, "Dongmen County is indeed in the hands of Duke Xinzhou. This area had been bitten off by Su Bei from Yang Tao's body. If not for Yang Tao's focus being on Nanxing, he would have smashed Yang Tao's brain." Huang Song asked, "Who took over Dongmen County?" Jiang Pingji ordered Qing Yuan to lead the newly promoted generals to attack Zhe County, but Zhe County was not made of paper. So far they had not achieved much. How did Qing Yuan cross Zhe County's line of defense to take half of Zhangzhou? It was evident that the person who conquered Zhangzhou was not Qing Yuan. Who could it be? The messenger said, "I heard that the flag has Yang written on it, so it should be Yang Tao." Yang Tao? Huang Song raised his brows as if he hadn't thought of this possibility. When half of Zhangzhou was lost, Yang Tao didn't have much of a reaction. This matter had already passed, so why was he settling scores now? The three feudal vassals of Dongqing were already fighting in a mess. Why did Yang Tao interfere? Huang Song hadn't thought of the possibility that Yang Tao was Jiang Pingji's reinforcements, but Qing Jing did. He told Huang Song about this conjecture, and the latter's expression became grave and solemn. After a while he said, "This seems like Lu Shi's style. He really doesn't want to be at a disadvantage." It wasn't that Jiang Pingji couldn't fight two people at once, but there was only benefit and no harm in getting another ally to share the firepower and pressure. Qing Jing said, "I can't be sure. This still depends on Yang Tao's next move. If he takes back half of Zhangzhou, he'll be satisfied. He should be taking advantage of the chaos to seek profits and specially send troops to take back his father's legacy. If he's not satisfied, he can send troops to cooperate with Qing Yuan to attack Zhe County." Needless to say, this was definitely not taking advantage of the chaos to gain benefits. It was clearly a premeditated military operation. Regardless of the possibility, Huang Song couldn't continue to play the supporting role. Almost at the same time, Su Bei also received the grievous news. With a loud bang, Su Bei slammed his palm on the table. His palm had turned red from the impact. "Yang Tao, you're such a bully." The enemy was taking advantage of the situation. To Su Bei it was like adding hail to snow. He had been restrained by Jiang Pingji's main forces in one area and had been sulking. The few times he went out to battle he won more than he won. This was a huge blow to his morale. Everyone was dispirited and listless. Su Bei only thought that Yang Tao was taking advantage of the chaos, but Han Yu wasn't so naive. "My lord, now is not the time to be angry," he said. "My lord should think about how to deal with Lu Shi and Yang Tao's alliance." Su Bei's heart thumped. Was it possible for the two of them to work together? The officials under the tent frowned. If Han Yu's words were true, the pressure they faced would increase. Is military advisor Han exaggerating to scare us? I've never heard of any friendship between the two of them. Half of the family business left behind by his father had been lost. Yang Tao hadn't even deployed troops from Nanxing to help. How could he come back just like that? The officials under the tent didn't want Yang Tao to get involved. Han Yu said calmly, "Since it's beneficial, why do we need to talk about friendship when it comes to forming an alliance? My lord, why don't we send an envoy to probe and persuade them?" Cheng Sun thought about it and chose a roundabout strategy. Yang Tao and Lu Shi don't have a deep friendship. If they really form an alliance, it must be because of some benefits. If we can find out the reason, we can find the right solution. If Yang Tao got involved, it was hard to say whether Zhe County could be saved. Su Bei looked calm on the surface, but he was actually anxious. If Zhe County was lost, he wouldn't have the face to meet his ancestors. Han Yu didn't say a word, but he agreed with Cheng Sun's suggestion. It would be best if they could break up their alliance without sacrificing a single soldier. But, were things progressing so smoothly? Han Yu frowned deeply as he thought about the recent battle situation. Although Lu Shi was usually impatient when it came to the battlefield, this woman's endurance was much stronger than he imagined. Han Yu had tried to lure her into an ambush several times, but Jiang Pingji knew when to stop. She refused to fall into his trap. Han Yu had a vague feeling that Jiang Pingji had been holding back until now because she was waiting for news from Yang Tao in the south. Han Yu didn't guess everything correctly, but he was 80% right. Report. The enemy is shouting in formation outside the pass. The faint sound of a horn drifted into everyone's ears. Chapter 1183. Yang Tao's participation in the battle had poured a basin of hot oil on the originally calm situation. Huang Song and Su Bei were solemn and worried, while Jiang Pingji heaved a sigh of relief. With Yang Tao's help, taking down Zhe County shouldn't be a problem. Jiang Pingji had long ordered Qing Yuan to restrain the troops from Zhe County. The two sides had been in a stalemate for half a month. Yang Si smiled and said, "Even so, it's hard to say if Yang Tao changes his mind at the last minute." Jiang Pingji said, "Others might, but it's unlikely for Yang Tao." Yang Si said, "What if Su Bei voluntarily offers Zhao Xiao to appease Yang Tao's resentment in order to protect himself?" Half of Zhangzhou had been taken back. Killing Zhao Xiao would be Yang Tao's revenge for his father's murder. As long as Su Bei endured the pain and sacrificed some of his flesh to appease Yang Tao, he might be able to send Yang Tao away. Su Bei has a fatal strength. He's very shameless. Jiang Pingji sneered coldly. Zhao Xiao voluntarily surrendered to his aristocratic family. Even if he murdered Yang Jian, he didn't harm Su Bei's interests. If Su Bei pushes him out to be a scapegoat for his own interests, not to mention other things, Su Bei's good reputation of 20 to 30 years will be ruined. After this, which aristocratic family would dare to surrender to him? Su Bei was born into an aristocratic family. His ancestors had a high reputation. These were his political capital, but at the same time, they were his burden. There was a kind of burden called puffing oneself up at one's own cost. Su Bei knew that Zhao Xiao was a hot potato, but he wouldn't let Zhao Xiao be a scapegoat. Yang Si laughed. "My lord knows Duke Xinzhao very well. The human heart is complicated, but he's a simple person." Jiang Pingji said, "There should be good news from Gong Liao's side." Jiang Pingji had high hopes for Qing Yuan, and he didn't let her down. Qing Yuan was also mischievous. For the past half a month he'd been following the rules. He didn't make any mistakes, but he didn't have any bright spots either. He didn't give the enemy great pressure. He even gave them the false impression that their military strength wasn't strong. He pretended to be weak and took the opportunity to weaken the enemy's vigilance. If it were any other lord, Qing Yuan would have been dissatisfied if he hadn't made any progress for half a month. However, Jiang Pingji let him do it. In order to support Qing Yuan's plan, Jiang Pingji also asked Qing Gong, who was born in Zhe County, to lead troops and horses to Qing Yuan's side to support him. As expected, the governor of Zhe County became more and more arrogant. Usually he would float on the spot when he walked. At the spur of the moment, news of Zhangzhou's defeat came from outside. The commander of Zhe County saw that the morale of his soldiers was low. He felt that they urgently needed a great victory to boost their morale. If he could achieve a great victory and capture the enemy's leader, he would definitely receive the lord's appreciation and his status and power would increase. Qing Yuan narrowed his eyes. It's about time. Qing Gong was a native of Zhe County. He was very familiar with the surrounding terrain and had provided Qing Yuan with many conveniences. Once again they sent out their troops to challenge Qing Yuan. The two sides fought fiercely and Qing Yuan's side was still no match for them. After fighting for a while they began to show signs of weakness. There was a saying that went, "Don't chase a cornered enemy," but Qing Yuan's repeated defeats in the past few days had fueled the arrogance of the defending generals. When someone advised him not to pursue a cornered enemy, the defending general said angrily, "A cornered enemy, a cornered enemy." Every time they come and go they say the same thing. An armchair strategist was nothing more than that. We've already probed Lu Gang's forces. They're not as terrifying as the outside world says. Their forces are small, so if we don't chase after them and kill them all, are we supposed to watch them escape? Army, follow me. But the place where Lu Gang's forces retreated is covered in tall bushes and dense forests. It's a good place to set up an ambush. We mustn't chase after them. We'd rather let one of them go by mistake than... Before he could finish speaking, the defending general had already galloped far away. It was not his fault that nobody listened to him. It was Qing Yuan's fault for acting several times in the past, so he had long worn off the defending general's wariness. The defending general led his troops to charge and beat up the remaining soldiers. It was actually somewhat irresistible. They had won repeatedly and their morale was high. However, he was not happy for long. Before he could retract the smile on his face, countless arrows shot out from the dense forest on both sides. The flags representing the enemy were raised, and the enemies popped their heads out one after another. Their battle cries shook the sky. An ambush? The defending general's heart palpitated. He grabbed the reins with all his might, causing the war horse under him to neigh in agitation. They were about to retreat, but Qing Yuan had already sealed off the path they had come from, giving them a chance to catch a turtle in a jar. Since you're here, don't leave. Qing Yuan heaved a long sigh of relief. He had been under too much pressure recently. Even if he deliberately showed weakness to the enemy, it still affected his morale. As the planner, the pressure he bore was not small. Seeing the enemy fall into the trap, he felt that the grievances he had suffered for the past half a month had all disappeared. Arrows, rolling logs, and hot oil were all directed at the enemy. The defending general was not Yang Si, and the troops under him were not the elites that Jiang Pingji had carefully trained for several years. They had already lost their sense of propriety when they encountered an ambush. The army formation was in a mess. How could they maintain order and resist the enemy's retreat? The more chaotic they were, the more casualties they suffered. In less than an hour, the place was already a river of blood. Broken limbs and remains were everywhere. It was like the inferno of Azura. Flames rose and a strange smell floated in the air. As time went by, the battle cries gradually became deeper. Early on, when they had fallen into the ambush, Qing Yuan had divided his troops to attack the city gate at the border of Zhe County. Once this city was breached, Zhe County would no longer have the protection of the natural stronghold. Qing Yuan could make use of the water resources in Zhe County to lead his troops straight in. Although there were important military towns along the way, most of the troops had been transferred by Su Bei to Hu County. As long as Qing Yuan was not out of his mind, he would definitely not lose. Seeing that the defense line of Zhe County was about to collapse, Su Bei and the rest were also anxious. He tried to send more troops to help, but there was still a god of death blocking the way, Jiang Pingji. Su Bei simply abandoned Han Yu's strategy and directly mobilized his troops to engage Jiang Pingji in the largest and most vicious battle since the start of the war. In the end, the more anxious they were, the more disadvantageous they would be. Without the hindrance of the terrain, how could Jiang Pingji's cavalry not run wild and trample on the enemy? The cavalry of the north borderline was so strong, but in the end they were still overthrown by Jiang Pingji. Would she be afraid of a mere Su Bei? If Huang Song had not sent more troops along the way to help Su Bei stabilize the situation, his losses would have been even greater. At the same time, the emissary sent by Su Bei also met Yang Tao. From his mouth, he extracted the reason for his alliance with Jiang Pingji. To be honest, Yang Tao originally did not want to get involved in the situation in Dongqing. He only wanted to quietly develop his strength and let the group of immortals fight amongst themselves. Who asked Su Bei to accept Zhao Xiao's allegiance? The hatred of my father's murder is absolutely irreconcilable. How can I allow my enemy to go unpunished? Yang Tao's voice was deep, and his mature face had the dignity of a superior. Emissary, there is no need to speak further. I will personally kill that despicable Zhao Xiao to comfort my father's soul in heaven. The emissary choked. Chapter 1184. Are you sure Yang Tao said that? Upon receiving the messenger's reply, Su Bei's face turned ashen. Firstly, he was furious that Zhao Xiao had made a mistake and he had to take the blame. Secondly, he was furious that no one had alerted him. Su Bei had roped in the power of the landowning households and managed an enormous network of connections. There were at least 40 to 50 surplus generals like Zhao Xiao who he kept up appearances. Every time a landowning household defected to his side, it meant the expansion of his own power and connections. How could Su Bei possibly reject them? Zhao Xiao was also a famous scholar in Zhangzhou's East Gate Prefecture. Su Bei had always been very tolerant towards scholars. He came to seek refuge with her, which meant that her reputation was attractive to famous people. He had never expected that Zhao Xiao would have such a debt on him. If he had known about it back then, he might not have been willing to accept him. Su Bei's expression did not change much, but his heart was filled with regret. Everyone knew how to say things after the fact. Those who understood Su Bei would know that even if he had known about the grudge between Zhao Xiao and Yang Tao in advance, he would still have accepted Zhao Xiao. Why did he say that? This was because other than the incident with Yang Jian, Zhao Xiao didn't have much of a blemish on his record. If Su Bei rejected Zhao Xiao's offer of allegiance because of the enmity between Zhao Xiao and Yang Tao, wouldn't that be telling the world that he was afraid of Yang Tao? Su Bei was someone who would rather die than lose face. Reputation and face were more important than any other worldly possessions. Moreover, when Zhao Xiao had pledged his allegiance to him, Su Bei's influence had been on the rise. He might not have been afraid of Yang Tao. Faced with Su Bei's interrogation, the envoy trembled as he replied, "That is indeed the case." This time Su Bei gave up. Under the tent, Zhao Xiao trembled inwardly. Even though his heart had shrunk into a quail, he still put on a righteous expression on his face. Rather than waiting for Su Bei to find trouble with him, he might as well be honest and take a step back in order to advance. Based on Su Bei's temperament and style, he would not be able to bring himself to punish him. "My lord, this matter is nothing more than a personal grudge between Xiao and Yang Tao. Every injustice has its enemy, every debt has its creditor. This matter should be settled by Xiao and him." Zhao Xiao's voice was solemn and tragic. "Back then I went to Nanxing to escape pursuit. Fortunately, my lord did not abandon me and gave me the title of general. I have been working for you for more than a year, but I have not made any contributions. I only hope that I can use my lowly body to do my best for my lord." Su Bei's complexion did not improve. Instead it worsened. "What is the meaning of this?" Zhao Xiao straightened his chest and said, "Xiao is willing to take your head and settle this old grudge. I Su Xinzhao will not do such a thing even if I die." Su Bei sternly replied, "If the world were to find out that I forced an official to die in order to protect myself, would you be accusing me of being unjust? Even if I can survive, I won't be able to face anyone." Su Bei decisively interrupted Zhao Xiao's words, not allowing him to refute. Zhao Xiao could only sigh and retreat. Su Bei dismissed the meeting, leaving Han Yu and Cheng Sun alone. When Zhao Xiao sought refuge with Su Bei, Han Yu was still on a business trip. He was so busy that his feet hit the back of his head. By the time he found out that Zhao Xiao was also in Su Bei's camp, it was already too late for him to stop him. Cheng Sun, on the other hand, had no room to speak. "This Zhao Xiao," Su Bei's eyes flashed fiercely. Don't be fooled by Zhao Xiao's righteous words. In reality, he was tearing down Su Bei's pride and forcing him to express his stance. To Su Bei, this was a humiliation. He hated it when others forced him to do something. Han Yu sighed. Yang Jian was an outstanding man, but in the end he died at the hands of a vile person like Zhao Xiao. Su Bei's eyes flickered. He silently suppressed the resentment in his heart. Now he was saying that Zhao Xiao was a vile person. Why didn't he remind him in time in the past? The more vicious Jiang Pingji's attacks were, the harder it was for Su Bei to defend himself. Under such circumstances, Su Bei's expectations of Han Yu grew higher. If Han Yu couldn't turn the tide, not only would Su Bei not sympathize with him, but he would also have a bad opinion of him. Cheng Sun spoke up in time to interrupt Su Bei's thoughts. "Looking at the current situation, we can't take the path of persuading Yang Tao." Upon hearing this, Su Bei's mind went blank. One Jiang Pingji was hard enough to deal with. If it wasn't for Huang Song's assistance and the combined forces of the two families, Su Bei would have long been defeated. When Yang Tao brought his troops and met up with Jiang Pingji, the scales of victory would undoubtedly lean towards Jiang Pingji's side. Compared to the disadvantageous situation on the battlefield, Su Bei was more worried about Zhecounty. Zhecounty was his base. If his base was also destroyed, Su Bei wouldn't have the face to meet his ancestors even if he died. Perhaps it was because the more one feared something, the more likely it would happen. Just as Su Bei and the other two were having a secret discussion, a piece of bad news arrived. Reporting, Su Bei frowned. "Come in." The messenger opened the tent flap and entered. With a heavy expression he reported, "Reporting to my lord, Zhecounty's Mingsha Pass has fallen. The garrison troops, including the garrison general, were ambushed. The enemy's army followed the Taiqing River and entered Zhecounty. They successively captured 3 strategic towns, Zhecounty. The messenger felt the terrifying pressure emanating from Su Bei. His voice became softer and softer. He lowered his head, not daring to look at Su Bei's face. Su Bei was so shocked by the news that he almost lost his balance. The scene before his eyes dimmed. Cheng Sun saw that the situation wasn't looking good and hurriedly stepped forward to support him. Zhecounty was a rich and populous place. The rivers within the territory connected the north and south, and the trade routes were developed. However, it also had a fatal weakness. It lacked natural defenses. Apart from Mingsha Pass, there weren't any decent passes. Once Mingsha Pass was breached, the enemy would be able to take advantage of the Taiching River within Zhe County. Su Bei had spent a lot of manpower to build those military towns in recent years. The garrison troops of Mingsha Pass were ambushed? What's going on? Han Yu immediately grasped the crux of the problem. Mingsha Pass had sufficient military strength. How could it be easily captured by the enemy? Unless the garrison general was greedy and rash. When Han Yu thought of this possibility, his already serious facial features became even colder. He had warned the garrison general of Mingsha Pass to avoid greedy. The messenger stammered out the cause and effect of the ambush. Han Yu was so angry that the veins on his forehead bulged. Zhe County was hopeless. Calculating the distance and the enemy's combat strength, it would take at most 3 to 5 days to conquer the entire territory of Zhe County. News from the battlefield was often delayed by a few days. Zhe County might have already fallen by now. Losing the territory could still be fought back, but family Han Yu's heart sank. Winner takes all. Su Fei was dead. The fate of his entire family was still vivid in his mind. Su Bei seemed to have thought of this possibility as well. He said with a serious face, "Can we send out the troops today?" Cheng Sun opened his mouth to speak. He turned his gaze to Han Yu, hoping that he could dissuade the emotional Su Bei. Han Yu said calmly, "The war just ended yesterday. The soldiers have lost too much of their combat strength and have yet to recover. It is not advisable to send out the troops today. My lord, please keep the matter of Zhe County a secret for a while. If everyone knows that Zhe County has fallen, they will be worried about their families and will not be interested in the war." Although it was heartless, Han Yu's approach was correct. If this bad news were to spread, the already weak morale of the army would most likely collapse. Chapter 1185. After conquering Mingsha Pass, Cheng Yuan made use of the Water Conservancy in Zhe County to quickly contact Yang Tao's main force. To be precise, he was contacting Wei Ci. After Wei Ci received the letter, he thought for a moment and wrote a reply to Cheng Yuan. The content of the letter was mostly about matters to take note of during the march, and it also contained some personal goods. Although Jiang Pingji was born into an aristocratic family in this life, she suppressed the aristocratic families even more ruthlessly than in her previous life. Regardless of whether one was a feudal lord or an emperor, one needed not only talent but also wealth to accomplish great things. How could one do it without money? 60% of the world's wealth was in the hands of the aristocratic families. If they did not take advantage of the chaos of war to attack the local tyrants and scrape off their fat, it would not be easy to make a move in the future. Once the world was at peace, the landowning households would use their resources to amass wealth again. It could be said that there would be no end of trouble in the future. However, this was not a problem for Wei Ci. He had followed Her Majesty for dozens of years in his previous life. He had seen with his own eyes that she had done countless evil deeds and dug countless traps for the gentry and commoners. He didn't dare to say that he had learned the essence of the other party, but he still knew how to imitate them. Don't be fooled by Wei Ci's good looks. When he becomes evil, he has the face of a human but the heart of a beast. The goods he smuggled in would definitely teach Cheng Yuan a lesson. Cheng Yuan and Qin Gong led the army and broke through the Mingsha Pass. Following the Taiching River, they conquered several important military towns. The hinterland of Zhe County was open to them. Before invading Zhe County, the two of them repeatedly ordered that the soldiers were not allowed to disturb the people. If anyone was found to be robbing the women, they would be punished according to military law. Those who voluntarily reported would be rewarded with merits, but those who did not report would be punished. Zhe County was the Su family's territory, and the people's hearts were with the Su family. If outsiders harmed the local people, it would definitely cause them to retaliate and resist. Jiang Pingji's training over the years was effective. Moreover, the military political commissar was violently brainwashing them day after day. Who dared to commit crimes against the will of the people? Our army won a great victory, but the soldiers were still in good order. This made Qin Gong sigh with emotion. If all the soldiers in the world could be like them, how many tragedies would there be in the world? Qin Gong's emotional words were accidentally heard by Cheng Yuan. Cheng Yuan smiled and said, "Feng Jing, you're wrong. If all the soldiers in the world are like this, the casualties will only be greater." Qin Gong was at a loss. Did Cheng Yuan say something wrong? Cheng Yuan explained, "In a battle between vassals, if their forces are almost the same and their military strength is equal, it means that the war will drag on indefinitely because none of them can do anything to the other. Fighting a war not only required the soldiers to fight with their lives on the line, but also required the support of the common people in the rear. The longer it drags on, the more people will starve to death and the more soldiers will die on the battlefield, In this way won't there be more casualties? Qin Gong understood. He scratched the back of his head in embarrassment and smiled innocently. Qing Yuan felt his hands itch. No wonder those military advisors liked to bully Liyun so much. It was addictive to bullying honest people. The population density of Zhe County was much higher than that of a small place like Hejin County. The more landowning households there were, the more wealth they would have. When Qing Yuan received Wei Si's reply, he immediately understood what to do. He didn't raise his butcher's knife against the landowning households, but he ordered a portion of his soldiers to break up and rob them under the guise of bandits. Before Qing Yuan led his troops to attack, Zhe County was considered a haven for the landowning households in troubled times. Every household had a rich heritage. When the army invaded, most of the small landowning households planned to move away to avoid the disaster. This actually benefited these fake bandits. They didn't rob women or people, they only wanted wealth. They took away all the neatly packed family wealth that they had painstakingly packed up. Of course they weren't too crazy. They didn't touch any of the jewelry on the women, but they couldn't let go of the accessories on the men. The small landowning households were in a hurry to move and were robbed, but the middle-ranking landowning households were unhurried. They didn't have anyone in their family who was an official, but their heritage was still passable. As soon as the new owner arrived, they surrendered to her without fear. But they didn't escape the evil hands. The bandits still looted half of their property. To prevent them from suspecting, they even raised their butcher's knife to kill those who resisted. Apart from these, the remaining landowning households and businesses were the landowning households that followed Su Pei. They were the most panicked, especially the families of Su Pei's officials. If they fell into Jiang Pingji's hands, it was hard to guarantee that she wouldn't use them to threaten their relatives. Su Yanxiao welcomed her second great escape under such circumstances. She had just woken up that day. The courtyard was different from its usual deserted state. The servants were busy packing their luggage. Su Yanxiao's position in Su Pei's residence was very awkward. A group of cousins treated her coldly, and the female elders ignored her. She didn't care. Instead, she locked herself in the courtyard to observe mourning for her deceased mother, chanting and copying scriptures every day. A few days ago, she faintly heard a few maids talking about the situation outside. It seemed that the enemy was about to attack again. Enemy? Which feudal lord? Su Yanxiao subconsciously thought of Qin Gong. After not seeing him for a few months, she actually thought of him more than before. Now she was all alone. Her closest blood relatives were gone. Only Qin Gong was somewhat familiar to her. The maid stammered, "I think it's the one in Wanzhou." Wanzhou. That was the Lord Lu Shi that Qin Gong served now? Ripples appeared in Su Yanxiao's calm heart. Her slightly furrowed brows slowly relaxed. When she heard that the enemy had attacked, she subconsciously thought of the barbican from a few months ago. Her heart tightened as if she had fallen into an ice cellar. However, Qin Gong's promise to her made her feel inexplicably at ease. All her hesitation and fear disappeared without a trace. Now, where was he? As usual, Su Yanxiao finished copying the scriptures. She recited the contents of the scriptures and placed the scriptures in a copper basin to burn for her deceased mother. With a creak, the courtyard gate opened. The first grade maid assigned to her by Su Bei's legal wife hurriedly said, "Miss Xiao, quickly." Su Yanxiao lowered her eyes and asked, "What's wrong?" The maid said, "The carriage and horses are already prepared outside." "Why hasn't Miss Xiao?" Su Yanxiao raised her eyelids coldly and glanced at the unruly maid. The maid wasn't the least bit intimidated by her attitude. Instead, she grabbed her wrist. Su Yanxiao pulled her hand back. "Go and tell Auntie that I'll go over after I've packed my things." The maid said, "Miss Xiao, what do you have to prepare? Right now, escaping with your life is more important. Money and jewels are all worldly possessions." Su Yanxiao laughed coldly and took the initiative to walk to the gate. "Forget it. Let's go." She was just an orphan girl living under someone else's roof. Even if the maid was rude to her, she couldn't say anything. The maid was right. Apart from this person, what else did Su Yanxiao have in this courtyard that belonged to her? Since that was the case, what else did she have to prepare? Su Yanxiao seemed to be invisible. She didn't make a sound as she was shoved into the carriage. She kept her head lowered throughout the entire journey. The carriage drove to the pier and Su Yanxiao was once again arranged to enter the cabin of the large ship. As she watched the pier disappear from her line of sight, she sighed silently. She lowered her head and recited the rebirth scriptures, as if doing so would calm her anxious and flustered heart. After traveling for about 15 minutes, the frightened cries of the women could be heard from outside the cabin. Su Yanxiao suddenly opened her eyes. Chapter 1186. Pirates? The sound of messy footsteps pierced Su Yanxiao's eardrums. A familiar fear spread uncontrollably throughout her body. Her eyes were wide open, her fingers almost digging into the flesh of her palms, and the roots of her teeth were also trembling as her footsteps approached. Outside the cabin, the frightened cries of the women could be heard. Although she had not seen it with her own eyes, she could picture the scene in her mind just from the sound. The experience outside Mountain Urn City resurfaced in her mind once again. Su Yanxiao's limbs were as cold as ice. Clang. The door of the cabin was violently pushed open, and the burly boatman whistled loudly at the panicking women in the cabin. "Oh, the big fish are all here." The other party's elegant words carried a thick County accent. He chuckled and said, "Are you going to come out on your own, or do you want us brothers to carry you out one by one? Whoever refuses to cooperate may be fed to the fish." The women in the cabin were all Su Bei's concubines, daughters born of concubines and first-ranked maids. Despite the pirates' threats, they wept and did not dare to move. They were miserable beyond compare, their cries almost piercing one's eardrums. Su Yanxiao clenched her fists in fear. Her face was pale from the loss of blood. She felt that the current situation was even more terrifying than that time in Mountain Urn City. Previously she had not been alone. Her mother had protected her with all her might, so Su Yanxiao had felt a sense of security. Now she was all alone. Her life and death were in the hands of the heavens. The pirates impatiently threatened her again. Su Yanxiao still did not move. The pale-faced first-ranked maid beside her pushed her. "Miss Xiao, if you don't go out now, they will throw you into the river to feed the fish." Su Yanxiao snapped out of her daze. Her face was pale as she turned to glance at the maid beside her. The inner residence of the Su family was not peaceful. These maids who served their masters were all shrewd people. They were used to swerve to the wind, flattering the strong and trampling on the weak. Su Yanxiao's status was awkward. Her biological father was Su Bei's younger cousin, but he had been forced to hang himself. Her biological mother had committed suicide for love. She was just an unloved orphan. Even if Su Bei wanted to treat her well for the world to see, how would the outside world know how she lived in the inner residence? Eldest aunt treated her coldly and never asked about her situation. No matter what, Su Yanxiao was Su Fei's eldest daughter. Her living expenses and monthly allowance were actually based on that of Su Pei's concubine daughter. The servants didn't serve her well and often slacked off. The only first-class maid was also a slacker. Every day, Su Yanxiao's meals were secretly eaten by the other party before they were sent to her table. Fortunately, the weather was still hot. If it was winter, she might not even have a hot dish to eat. Because Su Yanxiao was still in mourning, the auntie casually bought her clothes and jewelry. They looked good on the surface, but Su Yanxiao knew very well what was inside. Even so, after those items were put into the storeroom, they were secretly taken away by the servants. It wasn't that Su Yanxiao was soft-tempered, but she was now living under someone else's roof. How could she have the dignity of a master? She had also taken the opportunity to mention the wicked slaves to First Aunt, but First Aunt did not take it to heart at all. Instead, she encouraged the wicked slaves. For example, the first-grade maidservant beside him had repeatedly overstepped her authority and was constantly pushing and shouting. Su Yanxiao said, "If I go out, I'll die. If I don't go out, I'll still die. Why should I waste my energy to take 2 more steps?" The maidservant choked on Su Yanxiao's words. After a while, she rolled her eyes at her. What an ungrateful orphan girl. She didn't even live a decent life as a servant and always acted like a master. Did she really think that she was still the honorable wife of Lady Su? As the master and servant spoke, the pirates outside had already lost their patience. They raised a wooden club and raised it, ready to strike. The womenfolk were so frightened that their eyes were filled with tears. One by one, their legs turned to jelly as they supported each other out. Some of them even crawled out in embarrassment. The first-grade maidservant saw that Su Yanxiao refused to budge and spat, "Ungrateful girl." She followed the womenfolk out anxiously. Outside there were many pirates standing guard. They had already occupied all the boats that were escaping. Everyone was terrified. "What are you looking at? Haven't you seen a man before?" The pirates outside laughed and bared their teeth. A second ago they were still laughing, and the next second they were threatening with fierce faces. Their voices were as loud as thunder. "All of you, squat against the railings and put your hands on your head. If anyone dares to raise their head, I'll gouge out their eyeballs, strip off their clothes, and throw them into the river to be sacrificed to River Earl." Su Yanxiao saw that the pirates didn't have any intention of touching the womenfolk and was astonished. The pirates saw that there was a skinny maidservant in the cabin. They saw that her clothes were simple, that her black hair was bare, and that her small face was white and clean. They instantly thought that she was a low-level maidservant that served in a rich mansion. They urged, "You go out too." Su Yanxiao didn't have any desire to live right now. The heavens wouldn't care for one person again and again. Last time, Qin Gong was able to rush over to save her, but this time he couldn't escape. Rather than being herded outside like livestock and enduring unknown humiliation, it was better to die cleanly. Su Yanxiao wasn't moved. That pirate tried to threaten her with a wooden club, but she had an expression that said, "If you want to hit me, I'll kill you." The pirates? Our lives aren't easy. We're all out here to make a living. Can't we act according to the script? The pirates couldn't let her stay in the cabin. The women on these boats had special identities. If they accidentally killed someone, they wouldn't be able to explain it to their superiors. "Little girl, you're pretty tough." The pirates put away their wooden clubs and lifted up Su Yanxiao, who had a frightened expression on her face, as if he was lifting up a little chick. Lifting her up, the pirates even complained in their hearts. There were times when rich families didn't have food to eat. Such a good girl was starving. She was so skinny that she didn't even have 2 tails of meat left. The cold wind on the river blew against her face. Su Yanxiao's swollen mind calmed down. She was smart and thoughtful. Seeing that the pirates were standing guard orderly and didn't seem to have any intention of harming the womenfolk, she became suspicious. They didn't seem like pirates that robbed along the river. They seemed more like well-trained navy? Su Yanxiao was shocked by her own guess. What happened next made her heart skip a beat. A hand that wasn't thick but it was hot and dry, reached out from behind and covered her mouth. The other hand pulled her back. Su Yanxiao instinctively wanted to scream. In the next instant she opened her mouth to bite the other person's finger. The man behind her sucked in a cold breath. His other hand didn't delay and easily pulled her into the blind spot around the corner of the boat. Su Yanxiao's eyes were red. Seeing that struggling was useless, she used all her strength to slam against the railing of class. "Lady Su, it's me." Qin Gong had just pulled his finger out of her mouth when he saw that she wanted to jump into the river. He was so scared that his scalp exploded. Hearing the familiar voice, Su Yanxiao's body suddenly froze. However, her body still leaned forward due to inertia. The expected pain didn't come. Instead, she slammed into a wall of flesh. Su Yanxiao raised her head slightly. She saw Qin Gong's body leaning forward. He raised his palm to block her forehead, using it as a cushion. Qin Gong." Su Yanxiao felt a sour and hot feeling rush up her nose and spread to her eyes. Qin Gong wasn't wearing armor at this time. Instead, he was dressed in coarse hemp clothing. Although he didn't have his usual majestic aura, he still had the air of a dissolute knight. Chapter 1187. "I'm here. Don't be afraid, Lady Su." Qin Gong secretly heaved a sigh of relief. He helped Su Yanxiao up and respectfully distanced himself from her. Su Yanxiao couldn't describe how she felt. The moment she saw Qin Gong, she realized that all the negative emotions that had filled her chest had vanished. She lowered her head and asked in a confident tone, "Those pirates outside, did you bring them here?" Qin Gong vaguely responded, "Yes, I was ordered to capture Duke Xingzhao's family, but there are some matters that I can't use my real identity. For example, raiding other people's property." Su Yanxiao and Su Bei had a grudge, but she was still a daughter of the Su family. She couldn't bring herself to say such things. Fortunately, Su Yanxiao didn't ask what the matters were. She only felt that the fear that had surrounded her had all transformed into a warm sense of security. "Then, will it be all right for you to appear in front of me like this?" Although Su Yanxiao was young, her temperament had matured rapidly after the series of major changes. Ever since Yang Si had given her some pointers, she felt more guilty towards Qin Gong. Qin Gong had taken care of her on account of his former master, but she was still his burden at the end of the day. She wasn't a heartless person. She had seen all of Qin Gong's sacrifices. Hearing his words, Su Yanxiao couldn't help but worry for him. Logically speaking, I shouldn't have appeared to avoid being recognized. It wouldn't be good if I caused trouble for the Lord. Qin Gong said sincerely. But I'm really worried about you. You look so pale and I feel anxious. I'm afraid you'll do something stupid. Qin Gong had noticed Su Yanxiao long ago, but it wasn't convenient for him to show himself. He had been secretly observing her just now. Seeing her deathly still expression, he couldn't help it. He decided to cover his face and used the excuse of sending away the pirates on guard nearby. He then secretly pulled Su Yanxiao out to say a few words to comfort her. "Don't be afraid. You still have him." Su Yanxiao's cheeks reddened. A faint blush appeared on her pale face. An indescribable throbbing spread through her chest. Even she couldn't describe what she was feeling. She had never thought that Qin Gong was so good-looking. She couldn't get enough of him. Coincidentally, Qin Gong was the same. "I'm fine," Su Yanxiao said. Don't delay your business because of me." Even though Su Yanxiao knew that Qin Gong wouldn't abandon his work for personal reasons, she still couldn't help but remind him. The temperature of her burning cheeks didn't subside. Don't worry, Madame Su." Qin Gong didn't have much time, so it wasn't convenient for him to say too much to Su Yanxiao. Although there was no one around, the pirates standing guard on the other boat saw it. Young people admire AI, young girls yearn for love. The sweet atmosphere around the two could be smelled even across the two boats. "Lady Su." Just as Su Yanxiao was about to sneak back to the main group, Qin Gong unexpectedly called out to her. She turned around, but he did not know what to say. After a while, Qin Gong stuttered, "In the future I will protect you." Before she could take a step, Qin Gong's face had already turned red as he nimbly flipped down the deck of the lower deck. Su Yanxiao suddenly thought of something and blushed. Her temperature didn't go down for a long time. The pirates plundered all the money and goods on the other boats, moving box by box onto their own boats, and retreated in an orderly manner. Su Yanxiao had long since taken a tranquilizer and was no longer afraid of the pirates. On the contrary, when the pirates looked at her, they were like mice seeing a cat, wishing they could stick close to the wall. Occasionally, a few bold pirates tried to sneak a peek at her, but before they could do so, they were taught a lesson by the wily old fox beside them. Seeing this, Su Yanxiao burst into laughter, revealing a smile that she hadn't seen in a long time. The pirates didn't rob people or women. They only took away all the valuables, not leaving behind any food or water bags. Helpless, the people who had escaped from the disaster could only paddle the oars back with bitter expressions. Without food and water, they couldn't escape far. Unexpectedly, before their boats could reach the shore, rows of armored soldiers with a murderous aura surrounded the entire pier. Everyone was in a dilemma. Madame Su Bei's expression was so gloomy that it could drip water. These large boats not only carried Su Bei's wives, concubines and children, but also the families of many important officials. If they reached the shore now, it would be the same as walking into a trap. If they didn't, she was afraid that the enemy would go crazy and shoot the boats down. A bunch of pampered noble ladies, which one of them knew how to swim? They were all landlubbers. Qin Gong had already changed into his military uniform and gathered the majority of his troops to set up at the pier, waiting for their prey. He cupped his hands towards the deck of the boats, trying to move them with emotion and reason, hoping that the people on the boats would voluntarily disembark. "We are all civilized people, so we will try our best to solve problems in a civilized way." The few boats were filled with women, children, and old. Faced with Qin Gong's coaxing and threats, they didn't know how to respond. A young, beautiful woman said, "Everyone is exhausted and the wind is cold on the river. It's not advisable to stay for long. If we stay for too long we might get sick. It's better to reach the shore as soon as possible. I don't think Lu Shi would dare to risk universal condemnation and slaughter us." In this era there were still moral principles. On the battlefield there were some unspoken rules. Dukes could fight however they wanted, but they couldn't shamelessly attack their families. If a man lost in battle, that was his business. The women in the backyard could not be implicated. If Su Fei's wife and concubines hadn't encountered the bandits, they wouldn't have ended up like this. No matter how much Su Bei hated Su Fei, he still had to take care of his cousin's widows for the rest of their lives. He couldn't let them be humiliated. Madame Su Bei was hesitant. She really didn't want to disembark. At least there was a moment of peace on the boat. If she went ashore, wouldn't she become a captive and her life would be in the hands of others? "I'm afraid this isn't appropriate. Let's wait and see." Madame Su Bei declined tactfully. The beautiful woman didn't show any displeasure and returned to her circle. This woman was Han Yu's wife. She came from an aristocratic family. Her calm demeanor was more like a matriarch than Madame Su Bei. The two parties confronted each other for a long time. In the end, it was the people on the boats who gave in first. They didn't have water or food, so they couldn't hold on for long. Qin Gong sneered and sent people to send all the families back to their own residences. At the end he mentioned one more thing. Finally he said, "There have been frequent battles recently. The bandits are running amok and disturbing the neighbors. Madams, if there is nothing important, don't leave your residences to avoid the bandits. I will do my best to apprehend the bandits as soon as possible and ensure the safety of all the madams." Qin Gong spoke in a manner that was neither servile nor overbearing, but no one bought it. Many people were scared out of their wits. When their feet stepped on solid mud, they couldn't get used to it for a while and almost fell to the ground. Qin Gong sent people to escort them. When his gaze fell on Su Yanxiao, his eyes were filled with warmth. Qing Yuan teased, "She's young, she's really envious of others." Qin Gong laughed foolishly. "It's still too early to talk about this. We'll talk about other things when she reaches marriageable age." Qing Yuan sighed. The whole world reeked of love. Only his lord and a certain bronze frog still carried the fragrance of a single dog. Crow. In the distance, Wei Xi sneezed. Jiang Pingji rubbed her nose. Jiang Pingji mumbled, "Huang Bogeo still misses me." Chapter 1188. These hateful thieves. Su Pei's relatives were escorted back to the mansion by Qin Gong's soldiers. Upon entering, they saw a cold and empty courtyard. Because they had to escape, they could only choose the small and valuable items. The larger items were left in the old mansion for the servants to guard, and they could move them in the future. They did not expect to fail in their escape. When they returned home, they found that the house had been raided, and many of the servants were injured. The concubines wanted to cry but had no tears to find that the larger items they had not taken away had all been taken away by the thieves. A particular concubine's favorite shelf of many treasures had also disappeared, along with all the decorations on it. When they asked the servants who stayed behind, they said that not long after they left, a group of masked bandits had barged in to loot. Fortunately, these bandits did not have much foresight and only took gold and silver. The more valuable items, such as antiques, were left untouched. Compared to the latter, the gold and silver stolen could only be considered the tip of the iceberg. Madame Su Pei's face was filled with anger, but at the same time she was glad that the bandits were short-sighted and did not know what was good. It has been a day of fright. Everyone return to your own courtyards to rest. We will discuss the rest tomorrow. Madame Su Pei casually dismissed the weeping concubine. She was impatient, but at the same time she felt a faint sense of satisfaction. These concubines were beautiful but had no background. Their private storehouses were full of gold and silver, cloth, clothes, and rouge. At the same time, they were the most heavily raided area by the bandits. They had lost the most, but what was the point of crying in front of her? She would not be so kind as to compensate them. Su Yanxiao watched the show coldly, her face unperturbed. When First Madame gave the order to let them go, she followed the other women and bowed, returning to their own courtyards. Go check the private storehouses and see what was missing. Su Yanxiao casually found an excuse to send away the first-grade servant girl who was serving them. She wanted to be alone. The servant muttered, "The bandits are so greedy. How could they leave anything for us? Even if we search, it will be a waste. They will definitely be robbed clean." Her feet seemed to be stuck in the ground, unwilling to move. Su Yanxiao suppressed her anger. "If I tell you to go, then go. Why are you looking for excuses?" This maidservant relied on the fact that she was First Madame's servant and never took Su Yanxiao's words to heart. Even when she ordered her to do something, she would complain. The maid shrunk her neck, looking very timid. As soon as she turned around, a contemptuous expression appeared on her face, and the tip of her nose snorted. "She's just an orphan girl with no parents. She doesn't even have as much money as a servant girl. Why would she want to check the private treasury?" The maidservant grumbled, but she had no choice but to open the private storeroom. Although Madame Su Pei had never cared about Su Yanxiao, in order to prevent others from criticizing her, she had prepared many good things for Su Yanxiao. However, although the items were good, they were all valuable items that were rarely used and had markings on them. They were large and impractical, so they could only be placed in the private storage to collect dust. The few items that could be exchanged for silver were mostly stolen by the servants to be exchanged for money. Su Yanxiao's life in the Su residence was extremely unsatisfactory. The maidservant looked at the items in the private storehouse and exclaimed in surprise. Everyone's private stash had been ransacked by the robbers, except for Su Yanxiao's private stash, which was neat and tidy. There wasn't even a footprint on the ground. Su Yanxiao knew about this and muttered, "It's probably because the residence was too inconspicuous and the bandits didn't have time to search it. Go get some Buddhist scriptures and prepare a brush and ink. I want to recite the scriptures and copy them for my mother. Don't spread the news about the private stash, lest it attract unnecessary gossip." Everyone in the residence had been robbed. Only her own place was safe and sound. It was inevitable that people would be jealous. Unexpectedly, the maidservant turned around and reported this matter and Su Yanxiao's words to First Madame. First Madame laughed coldly and said with disdain, "Ungrateful wretch. What was there to hide about this matter? Could it be that the elders would covet her money? The next day the Su residence welcomed a special guest. Qin Gong had a tender face, but his tall and sturdy figure matched with his armor. No one dared to treat him like a child. First Madam and Duke Xanzhao have been separated for a long time. Why don't you write a letter home to inform him that you are safe? Otherwise, Duke Xanzhao will worry about the safety of his family at the front lines. First Madam's expression darkened. She glared daggers at Qin Gong. From her point of view, this was not writing a letter home to reassure Su Bei. It was clearly using his family to threaten him and force him to submit. She would not fall for this trick. First Madam said harshly and straightforwardly, I never thought that the noble Duke of Lanting would resort to such despicable methods. Is this the behavior of a man? Using his family to threaten others? She was a man. Was she still a hero? Qin Gong laughed. Madam has misunderstood my master. I have no ill intentions. No ill intentions? Even a ghost would not believe it. First Madam refused to write a letter home. Who knew what tricks the enemy would play with this letter? Seeing that she was unwilling, Qin Gong did not force her. Although he did not show it on his face, he was secretly lamenting that this person was not as far-sighted as First Madam. The First Madam that Qin Gong mentioned was not Su Bei's wife, but Su Yanxiao's birth mother, Su Fei's wife. If she were to encounter such a situation, she would definitely write a letter home. In the letter, she would explain the situation at home in detail and comfort her husband who was fighting a war. With a letter home, it would prove that his family was safe and sound. If her husband was at the end of his rope, he would more or less care about his family and would not risk his life. If there were no letters from home, the husband might lose his temper and fight to the death with the enemy, losing his life in the end. Qin Gong could not be bothered to remind her, lest her good intentions be taken for granted. He changed the topic to Su Yanxiao and pretended not to know. I heard that the daughter of the former master, Duke Lingwen, is staying at your residence? First Madam nodded. Qin Gong said, Yesterday I heard from the soldiers that a group of 1,000 bandits took advantage of our army's invasion of Zhe County to rob and commit crimes everywhere. Even Duke Xinzhao's residence was attacked. Today I have specially sent some to Chu. I hope Madam will not mind. Lady Wang immediately sensed something fishy in his words and she felt upset. Qin Gong first mentioned Su Yanxiao and said that he was worried that the residence would not have enough to chew. What did he mean by that? Although the residence had been raided by bandits, it was not so poor that it could not even feed itself. Was Qin Gong worried that she would starve an orphan girl? First Madam was unhappy and her expression became colder. Qin Gong acted as if he did not see it and requested to see Su Yanxiao. First Madam became even angrier. Did he want to see with his own eyes if she had mistreated the orphan girl? Qin Gong was Su Fei's former subordinate and Su Yanxiao was still young. Others would not say anything if he cared about his former master's orphan girl. Su Yanxiao blushed when she saw Qin Gong. Why are you here? This general will be leaving for the south in a few days. While the morale is still high, I will take down the remaining territory of Zhe County in one fell swoop. Qin Gong sat upright and said in a serious tone, I will be gone for almost half a month. This general is afraid that Lady Su will be worried, so I came to report. Who's worried? Su Yanxiao was embarrassed. Realizing that she had spoken harshly, she said with her ears red, Remember to come back. Chapter 1189. Qin Gong went to the battlefield with a peace of mind. He triumphantly conquered Zhe County and successfully joined forces with Yang Tao. At the same time, the situation at the front line had also entered a white-hot stage. Ever since Yang Tao's news came, Jiang Pingji changed her strategy against the enemy. The battles on the battlefield became fiercer and fiercer. She used the war to deplete Su Bei and Huang Song's troops. The former exhausted the most. He could barely withstand such a high frequency of battle. His kidney ached and he felt like his body was being hollowed out. Su Bei followed Han Yu's advice and concealed the news of Mingxia Pass's fall. But this was not a long-term solution. Paper could not contain fire. When the news of Zhe County's fall came, Su Bei's face turned ashen. The officials under his tent were even more anxious and uneasy. The soldiers were not in the mood to fight. The officials were worried about the safety of their families. The whole camp was shrouded in a gloomy cloud. Su Bei was drowning his sorrows in alcohol, trying to numb himself. Han Yu and Cheng Sun saw this and were anxious. When the tent was opened, the stench of alcohol wafted out and made him faint. Cheng Sun tried his best to persuade Su Bei, but Su Bei did not want to listen to him. He did not need false comfort. He needed a good strategy to break the enemy's situation. After several efforts they returned in failure. Cheng Sun's brows were almost knotted. When he met Han Yu, both of them sighed. As the Lord, Su Bei had no confidence in himself. He was drunk all day. It was useless for them to be anxious. Their disadvantage on the battlefield was too obvious. Han Yu wanted to suggest that Su Bei retreat to Shanwu City and stabilize the situation before making further plans. But Su Bei was not willing to do so. He even scolded Han Yu, which made Han Yu feel haggard. It was not scary to have a pig-like lord. What was scary was that the pig had its own opinions. That would be a nightmare. The enemy had used several battles to make them lose their bearings. Now they were fighting on the enemy's home ground. How stupid could they be? Qing Yuan and Qin Gong broke through Mingsha Pass and conquered Ji County. As the Lord, Jiang Pingji's performance was not bad either. Half of Hu County was already in her hands, forcing them to retreat. Now they could only use the terrain of Shanwu City to restrain Jiang Pingji's main force and avoid the brunt. But Su Bei flatly refused. Han Yu was helpless and could not sleep well for the past few days. Cheng Sun's opinion was similar to Han Yu's. However, Su Bei didn't even listen to Han Yu, so why would he listen to Cheng Sun? The enemy's morale is high, and now they have our families in their hands. Cheng Sun did not hesitate to speculate on Jiang Pingji with the most malicious of thoughts. After all, her actions were rebellious in the eyes of the gentry. In the past, she plundered for money, but in the future she might go crazy and dig up graves. In comparison, it was perfectly normal to threaten them with hostages. Our Lord has been troubled by this matter for the past few days. The soldiers in the camp are not in the mood to fight. Everyone is in a state of panic. If this goes on, Han Yu didn't dare to finish his sentence. If Su Bei heard about it, there would be more complications. Cheng Sun understood. Even though he was unwilling to admit defeat, Jiang Pingji's chances of winning were much higher than Su Bei's. If he hadn't abandoned Han Yu's strategy and sent his troops to confront Jiang Pingji head-on in a fit of rage, he wouldn't have lost more than half of his elite troops. One wrong step and every step would be wrong. Jiang Pingji's side would not be able to win if they were to fight a protracted war and compete with the logistics and supply lines. She mobilized too many troops and horses. The logistical expenses were astronomical every day. No matter how rich she was, she couldn't afford to lose this family. When the logistical problems were severe enough to shake the foundation, she would definitely withdraw her troops. That would be the best time for Su Bei to stage a comeback and reclaim his lost territory. However, it was obvious that Su Bei didn't have the patience. He couldn't accept himself cowering like a tortoise and avoiding the battle. Han Yu had calculated everything, but he had neglected to consider Su Bei's self-esteem. Let the Lord calm down for 2 more days. He'll come to his senses. Han Yu could only hope that Su Bei would come to his senses. Otherwise, the next battle might be their last. Compared to Su Bei's camp, which was gloomy, Jiang Pingji's camp was in high spirits. She had so much energy that she had nowhere to vent it. It was the same for Jiang Pingji. The weather outside was hot, and the anger in her heart burned even hotter. After all, she was already of age. She was full of energy, but she didn't have the life of an adult. It was inevitable that she would encounter a predicament where she had nowhere to vent her anger. The generals under her tent were unlucky. Jiang Pingji ruthlessly pinned them to the ground in front of countless soldiers. Their bodies rubbed against every inch of the ground. Li Yun and the others didn't understand at first. It was only when the military doctor said that their lord was full of energy that they understood instantly. After all, she was of age. Bah, the lord was full of energy. Instead of finding trouble with Wei Ci, why did she turn around and beat them up? Did generals have no human rights? They were human beings, not punching bags. If Mr. Wei still didn't come, they really couldn't hold on any longer. After much waiting, Wei Ci finally arrived with his allies Yang Tao, Qing Yuan, and the others. Su Bei knew that the enemy's reinforcements were about to arrive. No matter how unwilling he was, he had no choice but to listen to Han Yu's suggestion and retreat to the Barbican. Huang Song saw that the situation wasn't looking good and secretly made preparations to escape. Yang Tao's army set up camp 10 miles away. Wei Ci returned to see Jiang Pingji first. The weather was scorching hot. Wei Ci wore a green summer gown. It was exceptionally pleasing to the eye. The heat in his body gradually subsided. The human-shaped extinguisher was indeed worthy of its reputation. Han Mei, what's wrong with your face? Wei Ci saw that Li Yun welcomed him warmly and his heart warmed. Seeing that Li Yun's cheeks were green, he asked with concern. There was no war recently. Su Bei's side had repeatedly avoided battle. Logically speaking, Li Yun shouldn't have any new injuries. Li Yun lazily removed his armor. Otherwise, he would either collapse from exhaustion or be dehydrated from the heat after wearing something that weighed dozens of kilograms. Yesterday, I accidentally injured myself during a duel at the drill ground. Wuxia understood. This injury must have been caused by the Lord. Throughout the entire camp, apart from the commander-in-chief Fu Wang who was stationed at the rear, only the Lord had the strength to beat up Li Yun. Is the Lord in a bad mood recently? Li Yun trembled and asked, how did Zixiao know? The Lord rarely appears at the drill ground, let alone duels with others. She rarely greets people. If she's in a good mood, she definitely won't do it. After a comprehensive analysis, the Lord must have been in a bad mood, so she used a duel to vent her anger. Li Yun was unlucky enough to be targeted. Li Yun said with a bitter face, sigh, the Lord hasn't been able to sleep well recently. The military doctor diagnosed that she has excess energy. The term excess energy spoken of by adults is different from the term excess energy spoken of by minors. The former has a deeper meaning. Sadly, Weixi's body was still that of a young chick, but his soul was that of a veteran who had been on the job for many years. He understood in a second and then pretended to be dead. If the Lord has excess energy, then go kill Su Bei. Fighting a battle is the best way to vent her anger. Weixi's brain started working. He planned to give her a push and let Su Bei follow in Su Fei's footsteps. Chapter 1190. Some people couldn't stand being nagged. They were talking about Jiang Pingji just now, but this person followed the scent and came looking for her. My lord, why are you here? Jiang Pingji glanced at Wei Ci. Her calm eyes were filled with warmth. I just stretched my limbs on the military field and was about to return to the main tent for lunch when I happened to see you. Upon hearing this, Li Yun immediately found an excuse to slip away, leaving the space for Jiang Pingji and Wei Ci to avoid being the third wheel. Han Mei is getting more and more cunning. Back then, Han Mei was one of the few honest people among us. Jiang Pingji laughed involuntarily. Was she that scary? Wei Ci curled his lips into a faint smile. Li Yun's reaction was beyond his expectations, which inexplicably brightened his mood. In front of others, Wei Ci always hid his emotions in the bottom of his heart, using a gentle mask to conceal his true emotions. In front of Jiang Pingji, he rarely deliberately concealed it. Well, the most important thing was that it was useless to conceal it. She could see through it. Zixiao, are you in a good mood? Wei Ci said, my lord is in a good mood too. Jiang Pingji crossed her arms and teased him with a smile. I'm in a good mood because the frog that ran away from home is back. The salted fish in the streaming room was really fickle. Some time ago he was obsessed with the 4 cardboard human brains, but now he crossed species and treated the frog as his son. Jiang Pingji didn't immediately notice Wei Ci's return, but the camera in the streaming room had a wider field of vision than hers. When Wei Ci appeared in the streaming room's camera range, the entire streaming room suddenly exploded like boiling water poured on hot oil. Shenyo, Croak, the beauty croak is back. Shushenya Li, what? My croak son is finally back? Fairy Meowfuball, son, I missed you so much. Jingru Mingmo, Croak son is back? Seems like he brought a little friend back. Son, you're really helpful. Looking at the screen full of Croak's son, Jiang Pingji suddenly found it hard to look at Wei Ci's face. The standard of the salted fish audience in giving nicknames was like the standard of her giving names. It was terrible. Since a while ago, the salted fish audience seemed to be possessed. The frequency of the frog's appearance increased until it dominated the screen. Even if Jiang Pingji did not look at the bullet screen in the streaming room, her screen was flooded with frogs every day. It was impossible for her not to know about it. She imitated the young people's memes and the audience cheered her on, saying that she was keeping up with the trends, but Wei Ci was at a loss, his bright eyes filled with confusion. What? A frog that ran away from home? It wasn't that the Lord didn't like pets. When did she raise a frog? As intelligent as Wei Ci was, his brain also stopped for a moment. However, a smart person was a smart person. Wei Ci really did not understand the joke of traveling son in the live streaming room, but combined with the context and the fact that his lord had once teased him with the phrase, boiling a frog in warm water, he quickly understood. Wei Ci coughed softly and pretended to be calm, but the blush and heat at the tips of his ears did not subside so easily. He didn't know if it was because of the weather, but he actually felt a little hot. Zixiao hasn't answered my question yet. Jiang Pingji helped him to change the topic. What if he scared them away again? The frogs that other people raised could, at most, carry a backpack when they went on a trip. The frog that she raised was complicated and hard to guess, and would often pretend to be dead. Sigh, my heart is tired. Wei Ci said, "In this world, there is nothing more delightful than seeing my lord." What he said was true, but it was not the main reason why he was happy. What really made him happy was Li Yun's reaction. His actions indirectly admitted his relationship with the Lord, and he had no intention of objecting. In his previous life, this was something that he dared not even think about. Jiang Pingji said, "Say it twice more in private. Be creative. I like to hear it." In terms of straightforwardness and enthusiasm, Wei Ci would not be a match for Jiang Pingji even if he practiced for 10 lifetimes. Wei Ci was speechless. Neither of them were emotional people. The relaxed atmosphere also came to an abrupt end because of Yang Tao. Yang Tao was her ally. He had sent troops from thousands of miles away to cooperate with her. Jiang Pingji could not neglect him. Meeting Yang Tao again after so many years, she immediately searched through her memories. The slightly childish and naive youth in her mind gradually overlapped with the steady and mature youth in front of her. She recognized Yang Tao's identity immediately, but the idle audience in the live streaming room was not so sharp. To them, Yang Tao was just a sunny youth who appeared several times at the Huangshui meeting. Even if he was good-looking, he could not stand the exposure in the live streaming room. The idle audience had only heard of Yang Tao but had never seen him. Moreover, the audience was too mobile so they could not remember him at all. However, a big shot was a big shot after all. There was still an exception among the 850,000 viewers. Tudu Feiqiu. Is this Yang Jian's silly and sweet son Yang Tao? Gui Kai Guo Fengxiu. Smiley-faced, Engel. It seems so. I have been drooling over his good gay friend Yan Lin for many years. He was my first love. Lao Ciji Lianming. Time flies. In the blink of an eye, the silly and sweet boy has also matured. The audience's impression of Yang Tao was very shallow. If Jiang Pingji had not formed an alliance with him, causing his name to appear more frequently, the audience would not have remembered such a person. The new audience did not remember, but the old audience began to reminisce about the past with Yang Tao's appearance. When Yang Tao was still a silly and sweet boy, many of the audience were still single. Many years had passed. The silly and sweet boy had become a steady and mature lord, but the single dogs were still single. Jiang Pingji said, "We haven't seen each other for many years. Jingza, how have you been?" Yang Tao replied, "Lanting's elegance has not diminished from the past." Even though he knew that Jiang Pingji was a woman when he saw her, Yang Tao still found it difficult to equate her with his gender. Or rather, the appearance of Lu Shi's current body was too non-invasive and too confusing. After the basic greetings were done, Jiang Pingji went straight to the point and talked about Su Bei. If she did not crush this child to death, she might not make it to next year's Qingming festival. Speaking of serious matters, Yang Tao quickly got into the zone. The atmosphere around him became serious and serious. Of course, these 4 words were not relevant to the idle audience. Apart from a few provocative comments, the majority of the bullet screen was idle chatter and ridicule. Qfeng Pai, speaking of which, it's strange. Our streamer is not ugly. Why is it that after so many years only one peach blossom has bloomed? According to the usual pattern, shouldn't she use her personal charm to conquer the various lords? Fortunately, this was a cross-dimensional ancient live stream. It was full of gimmicks. If it was changed into a television drama or a novel, it would most likely be a flop. Jiang Pingji had billions of diehard fans in their dimension. The number of peach blossoms she had could fill up the Atlantic Ocean. Tudu Feiqiu, isn't this question hard to understand? Would you want to pull your beliefs down from the altar? Not to mention pulling down the altar, even the thought of doing so is blasphemy. The idle audience, if that was the case, Wei Ci was really a brave warrior. Wei Ci? He wasn't. He didn't. He was wrongly accused. Shanqing had already been thoroughly studied by everyone. Su Fei was trapped in Shanqing. In the end, the city was breached and he died. Now that it was Su Bei who was trapped, her enemies were Jiang Pingji and Yang Tao. Naturally, it was even more difficult to defend. It was a foregone conclusion that they would meet their end. I wonder how Su Bei is feeling now. Jiang Pingji gazed at Shanqing from afar. The cold wind passed through her hair, leaving not a trace. She crossed her arms in front of her chest and said, "He should have a deep understanding of how Ling Wengong felt a few months ago." Chapter 1191. Su Bei's mood was indeed terrible. A few months ago, he had forced Su Fei into a hopeless situation and forced him to commit suicide. Now that it was his turn, Su Bei could finally feel the despair. He was like an old beast that had been injured, lost its claws and had its teeth pulled out. He was afraid of his future and even more afraid of death. Su Bei had been the favored son of heaven since he was born. He was the eldest grandson of the Su family and was envied by everyone. Although there were times when things didn't go his way, he was still the rightful leader of the Su family after enduring the death of the biased old man. He was supposed to be the epitome of a winner in life, but now he was reduced to the state of a stray dog. Su Bei didn't believe in fate, but now he had no choice but to believe it. He had forced his cousin Su Fei to his death, so he was forced into the Barbican by others and followed in Su Fei's footsteps? Su Bei seemed to be possessed. The more he thought about it, the more he felt that it was fate. However, he didn't become depressed because of this. Instead, he became more irritable and easily angered. Many of the servants who served him were beaten up. Looking at Su Bei's current state, Han Yu couldn't equate this madman, who couldn't withstand setbacks, with the gentle, modest and ambitious youth he once was. It was as if that youth was just a figment of Han Yu's imagination. This made Han Yu extremely disappointed. Han Yu and Cheng Sun couldn't persuade Su Bei. As his brother-in-law, Xie also tried to persuade him, but to no avail. Right now, Su Bei was already stuck in a dead end. Apart from himself, no one else could help him. Han Yu sighed softly. His gentle eyebrows were tinged with worry, but he quickly adjusted and maintained his usual expression. Commandant Xie, have the troops in the city been accounted for? Su Bei had given up, but Han Yu couldn't slack off. He had to be responsible for the soldiers in the city. Xie replied, they have been accounted for. However, everyone's morale is low and they are afraid of battle. Even though we killed a few deserters as a warning to others, it didn't have much effect. The enemy generals are still challenging us all day long, clamoring to instigate the soldiers to rebel. Now there are more and more deserters. Xie wouldn't have had such a headache if they had attacked the city. However, the enemy deliberately made fun of them. They didn't attack the city and instead held a strange-looking horn and shouted at the city gate. He didn't know what these people ate to grow up, but their voices were so loud that it was impossible for Xie not to hear them from the top of the wall. In fact, although the voices of the soldiers responsible for shouting provocations were loud, they were not loud to this extent. Jiang Pingji had created a megaphone a long time ago. The thin copper sheet was in the shape of a cone, with a circular opening at the top. Although the design was simple and crude, its ability to transmit sound was not weak. If it was used to shout in front of a battle, the effect would be even better. Wasn't it coming in handy now? The first is to attack conspiracies, the second is to attack friends, the third is to attack soldiers, and the third is to attack a city. Attacking the heart is the top priority, attacking the city is the bottom priority. Fighting the heart is the top priority, fighting the army is the bottom priority. It wasn't that Jiang Pingji hadn't thought of attacking the city, but a centipede would not fall down even if it died. Su Bei's remaining troops weren't dough balls, and they weren't something that others could knead as they pleased. If they were to forcefully attack the city, Jiang Pingji and Yang Tao would have to dig out a piece of flesh and bleed a little in order to take down the Barbican city. After thinking about it, Yang Si, the naughty guy, came up with this trick. 3 shifts a day, 24 hours a day, taking turns to shout provocations. They would beat the drums and sound the megaphone in front of the battle, instigating the enemy's morale. Su Bei had suffered successive defeats, and the morale of the army was on the verge of collapse. The soldiers didn't have their own opinions, so a few words of instigation could sway them. The effect was immediate. The number of deserters increased. Even if Xie slaughtered them in front of everyone and slightly stabilized the army's morale, the soldiers were still panicking. Xie was so busy that he didn't have time to tidy up his appearance. Stubble had already appeared on his short head, and he looked much more haggard and downtrodden than usual. Han Yu felt a headache coming on. Killing only deserters can be effective for a while, but in the long run, it will only produce the opposite effect. There was a limit to everything. Killing 1 or 2 deserters could serve as a deterrent to others, but if 100 deserters were killed, not only would the soldiers not be obedient, but they would also feel that their leader was cruel by nature, which would further strengthen their desire to escape. Xie also understood this principle. But if deserters were allowed to spread, sooner or later there would be no soldiers left to defend the Barbican city. If my lord can, Xie opened his mouth but swallowed the rest of his words after a while. If Su Bei, as the lord, could take the initiative to stand up and boost the morale, not only would it stabilize the army's morale, but it would also motivate the soldiers to fight to the death. Unfortunately, Han Yu's eyes flickered, but he didn't say a word. What's the situation on Huang Song's side? Huang Song was their ally. Even though the relationship between the two parties wasn't that close, without Huang Song's help, Su Bei would have already been defeated. As soon as Han Yu asked, Xieze looked as if he had been humiliated. He clenched his fists in grief and indignation. Him? Although Huang Song left some people behind, what can they do? Self-preservation was everyone's instinct, but as the one who had been abandoned, it was impossible for Xieze not to be angry and resentful. Han Yu's furrowed brows became more and more tangled. Finally, is there any news from Zhe County? The morale of the army had hit rock bottom. One of the main reasons was the fall of Zhe County and the loss of the lives of their relatives. Han Yu was also worried about his family and his children, but he couldn't show it directly. If he didn't trust Xieze, he wouldn't have dared to ask. Xieze sighed and shook his head with a bitter smile. There's no news yet. I don't know if they are dead or alive. Han Yu said, I have met Lu Shi several times. Although I can't guarantee it, according to her temperament, she wouldn't lay her hands on the women, the elderly, and the young. A real powerhouse would never become a powerhouse by bullying the weak. Xieze frowned and said, I hope so. His family was also in Zhe County, so it was impossible not to worry. Han Yu looked at the top of the city wall with some nostalgia in his eyes. Don't worry, she won't do that, Han Yu said with certainty. Recently the war had reached a stalemate. There was a limit to what Han Yu could do. He had more time to reminisce about the past. In his memory, Lu Shi was a high-spirited and rebellious teenager. If she really had the ambition to rule the world, she wouldn't have dug her own grave at such a time. Xieze was surprised. Why? Han Yu said, slaughtering the women and children of the enemy. If she dares to bear such a bad name, she will completely lose the qualification to rule the 9 states. Let's not talk about the distant past. Do you know how many aristocratic families there are in this small hill city? How wide was their network of connections? Even if Lu Shi mobilized many poor families, the people under her command are still related to other forces, just like Gong Luo and Qing Yuan under her command. By doing so, she not only cut off her own path of retreat and destroyed the foundation that she had built for years, but at the same time, she also buried a fatal hidden danger for herself. Conquering the world was never a game for one person, and it wasn't a game to kill all at once. Jiang Pingji wanted to absorb Su Bei's power and territory to strengthen herself, so she couldn't offend everyone. Xieze took a deep breath. He looked around and suddenly asked a very rebellious question. Military counselor, if Hill City falls and the Lord is unlucky, then you die, surrender, or live in seclusion. Chapter 1192. Han Yu didn't answer him directly. Instead he said, knowing the way in the morning, one can die in the evening. Xieze asked, what is the way of the military counselor? Is it the Lord? Han Yu curled his lips and revealed a faint smile. Xieze was uneasy and felt that he had asked a stupid question. Han Yu didn't answer but asked, do you know anything about my youth, Colonel Xie? Xieze was stunned and answered straightforwardly, more or less. Han Yu's cold face softened a little, making his already outstanding facial features even more dazzling. His appearance was very outstanding. Many people who were jealous of Han Yu even spoke ill of him behind his back, saying that Su Bei valued Han Yu because Han Yu's face was too good-looking. Some despicable people even maliciously speculated about the relationship between Han Yu and Su Bei, deeply suspecting that their relationship was not as simple as it seemed on the surface. Thus, they added a bit of flirtatious elements to the story. These absurd rumors even reached the ears of Su Bei's legal wife. Because Su Bei's legal wife and Xieze's wife were sisters of the same clan, Xieze had vaguely heard from his wife. When Xieze first met Han Yu, he was also attracted by his appearance at first glance. It seemed that the rumors were not entirely false. At least the face of the military counselor was really good-looking. No wonder so many people were jealous of him. Han Yu didn't pay attention to Xieze's inner thoughts. He said calmly, when I was young, my family was involved in an unwarranted evil. If it weren't for my master, I'm afraid that the whole family wouldn't have been able to escape unscathed. Although we were lucky to escape, our family gradually declined and we were no longer as glorious as we used to be. Everyone in the world follows the red and white, flatters the strong and belittles the weak. There are many people who despise the law because of their family background. The world is chaotic and justice is lost. I often doubt myself whether what I'm doing is right. Perhaps everyone has such a confused period of time. Han Yu, who was intelligent and thoughtful since he was young, was no exception. He had a lot of doubts in his heart and couldn't find a way out even after thinking about it for a few times. Finally he asked his master, Master Yuanjing. The sage once said that if one hears the way in the morning, one can die in the evening. So, does Wenbin have his own way? Master Yuanjing said, Zixiao's Tao is to cleanse the universe and bring order to the chaotic world. Yumo's Tao is to follow the will of the heavens and support the orthodoxy. Xiaoyin's Tao is to unify the world and unite the nobility. When people have their own Tao, they will know the meaning of their birth and they will know how to walk and what to do. Han Yu asked a presumptuous question, "What is Master's Tao?" "Students everywhere," Master Yuanjing said with a smile. Han Yu said, "Master has reached perfection." Master Yuanjing shook his head and said, "No, it's far from perfection. Throughout sage Confucius's life, he had 3,000 disciples, but only 72 sage plain cultivators. This is an achievement that ordinary people can't achieve in their lifetime, but does one bin really think that sage Confucius has reached perfection?" Han Yu didn't understand. As a young man he could only look at his teacher and wait for his answer. Master Yuanjing accepted the talents of hundreds of schools. To him there was never any family that was expensive or cheap. He respected sage Confucius, but he was not blind. Han Yu was fortunate enough to hear his teacher dissing Confucius. Master Yuanjing smiled bitterly and said, "I have 3,000 disciples, but how many living beings are there in the world? 10 million or 10 million? In the face of such a huge number, 3,000 people are like a drop in the ocean, not to mention that there are only 72 sage plain cultivators." Sage Confucius traveled around the world in his early years, and he only focused on teaching and educating people after running into a wall many times. He did a good job, but he was not the best. My Tao in this life is to have students everywhere. I will not only teach 3,000 students but also 30,000, 300,000 or even 30 million. But I am only one person and it seems that I am not as good as sage Confucius. He had a great ambition but the reality was cruel. Master Yuanjing could teach elite students, but the sense of achievement was far less than educating and enlightening people. His energy alone was limited, but he could pass on his Tao. Maybe after generations, there would be more and more people who followed his Tao and enlightened people. Han Yu was in a state of shock after listening to Master Yuanjing. Master Yuanjing said, "Your Tao is something that you are willing to bet your whole life on, and your life is vulnerable in front of it." Under the guidance of his teacher, Han Yu felt that the thick fog that covered his eyes was gradually thinning, and the path under his feet was revealed. The thorny path extended into the distance, and he didn't know where the end of the path led. Han Yu woke up from his memories and said calmly, "The Tao of the Yu is the law." Xie was stunned for a moment as if he didn't expect such an answer. "Law?" Han Yu nodded and said with certainty, "Yes, it is the law. The law is fair and just. It doesn't favor the powerful and it doesn't favor the powerless. In front of the law, everyone is equal. It is the law does not lie to the powerful, and the rope does not bend. It is the law does not avoid the officials who punish, and the people who reward good deeds. The wicked have nowhere to hide and all evil, injustice and filth can't hide. Only in a world where the law prevails can the people live and work in peace and contentment. They don't have to worry about the fatuous monarch, the rebellious officials and the oppressive officials. That is the Tao of the Yu. There is no distinction between the close and the distant, and there is no distinction between the rich and the poor." Xie didn't know what to feel after hearing Han Yu's words. Han Yu said that he pursued the law and justice, but in essence he wanted to use the law to bring peace to the world. Would Su Bei be able to shoulder such a heavy obsession and ideal? Xie didn't have to think too much to know that Su Bei couldn't. Therefore this scumbag was destined to let Han Yu down. If Su Bei couldn't do it, Han Yu would follow a wise ruler who could shoulder such high expectations. Xie faintly felt sad for his lord, mourning for his lack of ambition. If this was Han Yu's ambition, then wouldn't Su Bei's previous actions be stepping on landmines? Even if Su Bei didn't kneel in the Mountain Urn City, there would be a day when he and Han Yu would drift apart. People with different beliefs could not make plans together. Xie looked at Han Yu with a questioning gaze. "My lord's way of doing things seems to be very different from the military counselor's Tao." Su Bei had trampled on Han Yu's Tao, with his completely different attitudes towards the commoners and the gentry families. Han Yu twitched his mouth and didn't say a word. What's the point of saying all this now? The most important thing is to solve the predicament. Even if the Tao was different, Han Yu wouldn't easily give up on the lord he had chosen. When he first met Su Bei he wasn't like that. He was a wise ruler that Han Yu was satisfied with at first glance. Xie didn't know if it was because of the depressing atmosphere, but he couldn't help but ask Han Yu. "Military counselor, do you think that Lu Shi would be the one to put Master's Tao into practice?" If Lu Shi was, Han Yu would most likely pledge allegiance to him after the city was breached. If it wasn't, According to Lu Shi's temperament, he wouldn't give the military counselor the choice to live in seclusion. Either die or pledge allegiance. There was no third option. Han Yu sighed and said, I don't know. But in his heart he said. Chapter 1193. Su Pei is too thick-skinned. After scolding for so many days, why hasn't there been any movement? Even though Li Yun had a good temper, he was a little angry when he met an enemy who was unmoved by persuasion and only wanted to live. He could not help but complain. Maybe Field Officer Li is too polite and didn't scold harshly enough. Jiang Nongqin sat casually on the railing, one leg propped up while the other dangled in midair. The silver knife in her hand was cutting the cork. Recently the war was at a stalemate. Other than patrolling and training, she had nothing else to do. She learned some carpentry out of boredom. Yang Si also said that she was very perceptive and learned quickly. In the future, if the world was at peace, she could open a carpentry shop to support her family. If Yang Si was not her lord's treasured strategist, Jiang Nongqin really wanted to use the knife in her hand to cut off his mouth and explode his fat. Whether it was prosperous or chaotic times, she was willing to overcome all obstacles for her lord. It was a disgrace to retire and become a carpenter. Li Yun said embarrassedly, there are many women in the army. If I scold too harshly it won't be good. Didn't they hear that the military commissar brainwashed the soldiers to be polite and put on airs in front of the women? Scolding in front of the battlefield was a tradition. The more violent ones scolded their ancestors, the more polite ones cursed their ancestors, and the more vulgar ones cursed their mothers. Since ancient times, humans could never avoid the female relatives of the other party when scolding. Unfortunately, her lord was a woman, so she had to avoid certain taboos. Jiang Nongqin sneered. Scolding in front of the battlefield was to raise morale. Being violent was also a way to vent pressure. Li Yun repeated the same few words. The enemy went from being angry at the beginning to ignoring him because he scolded too lightly. If he used a big move right from the start and angered the enemy so much that he died of a brain hemorrhage, that would be more interesting. Scolding should be directed at the most painful part. Wait here, I'll find you some help. Jiang Nongqin spun the knife in her right hand twice, then sheathed it and hung it at her waist. Li Yun was surprised. Who? An idler. Jiang Nongqin said, he's free now anyway. It won't take long to help him. Yang Si was speechless when he heard Jiang Nongqin's intention. In terms of scolding, he couldn't be the one to do it. Qiguan Wenjing is better at this. Yang Si was a vengeful person. Qiguan Rang had almost sent him to the Western Paradise with a written order, but he still remembered it now. Even though he would not seek revenge, he would still occasionally bring up Qiguan Rang to defame him. Jiang Nongqin said, Military Counselor Qiguan is not in the camp now. He's defending the rear. How would he have the time to write this? Yang Si, Qiguan Rang was a busy man and he was a freeloader? Yang Si still wanted to struggle. He was a scholar, how could he rudely spit at others? He continued, now that the Lord is attacking from the encirclement, she's slowly destroying the morale of Su Bei's forces. According to the scouts' reports, the number of deserters is increasing and their morale is declining day by day. If we provoke them too much now, it might even stimulate their determination to fight to the death. Jiang Nongqin said coldly, the longer the army besieges us, the more food we consume. These rations had been painstakingly saved up by the commoners. How could the lowly lives of Su Bei and the others compare to these precious rations? If they really have the courage to break out of the city and fight us head-on, why would the army be afraid to fight? Of course it would be to defeat the enemy. In this way we can save time and have more time for the soldiers to recuperate. Roar, after not seeing her for a few days, she had become glib. Yang Si's expression became awkward. He averted his gaze, not daring to look directly at Jiang Nongqin. He wanted to ignore Jiang Nongqin. As long as he left her hanging for a long time, she would naturally retreat in shame. After all, a lady's skin was not as thick as a man's, not to mention that he was an outstanding man. However, Yang Si still underestimated Jiang Nongqin's patience and perseverance. Like Feng Zhen, his swordsmanship was at the level of a square dance. How could a freshman from a small class compare to Jiang Nongqin? This warrior had thousands of lives on his hands. Right. Field Officer Jiang, don't stay in my tent for too long. It's not a good influence. Jiang Nongqin laughed coldly as if mocking him for overestimating himself. With Yang Si's physique, what could he do to her? If there really was a bad influence, it would most likely be because of the rumors about how she treated Yang Si. Alright, she was indeed mocking him. Yang Si reluctantly wrote more than 2,000 words on the bamboo slip. He scolded to his heart's content. Qiguanrang was born at the border between Chongzhou and the north borderline. The people there were tough but too straightforward. The declaration also represented the government. No matter how ruthlessly he scolded someone, he had to think twice. Yangtze was different. He was born in a brothel and was used to the scolding of hooligans and shrews on the streets and alleys. No matter if they were reserved and graceful, straightforward and unrestrained, or vulgar. He was proficient in the essence of the scolding of various sects and used it as if it was his own arm. Now he was forced to do something beyond his abilities by Jiang Nongqin. There was a fire in his heart. He picked up his brush and scolded someone. He felt so good that he could not stop. "I'm done." Yangtze put down his brush and rubbed his sore wrist. "Are you satisfied, Field Officer Jiang?" Jiang Nongqin looked down and roughly, then raised her head to look at Yangtze. "If Su Xingzhao dies of anger because of you, I won't fight with you for this credit." Yangtze's heart skipped a beat. Was Jiang Nongqin praising or scolding him? Women these days are really not to be trifled with. After Jiang Nongqin left, Yangtze could not help but complain in a low voice. Ever since he followed a lord with a different style, Yang Xifeng's vagabond life had become much more restrained. In the past 2 years he had become even more ascetic, like an ascetic monk. He had no choice. The lord was either preparing for war or on the way to war. He was holed up in the military camp all year round. What kind of place was the military camp? Other than shirtless men and muscular women, he could not bear to do any of them. Even if he could bear to do it, he suspected that the final position would be different from what he expected. As if he had thought of an embarrassing scene, Yangtze turned his face away and spat twice. He expelled the image of an experienced driver driving from his mind. Jiang Nongqin threw the fruit to the little angel, Li Yun. "Read it according to this. I don't believe that Su Xingzhao can still bear it." Li Yun opened it and took a few glances. This is military advisor Yang's handwriting? He had never heard of Field Officer Jiang and military advisor Yang being friends. Although the civil and military officials in the Lord's camp got along well, they were still two different circles after all. They did not have much interaction. Jiang Nongqin was also a clean stream among the military officials. She could not get along with any circle. She was loyal to the Lord and had always been a lone ranger. She said, "Yes, military advisor Yang wrote this. After all, he was taught by Master Yuanjing. His vocabulary is richer than that of the orderly in your camp." Ever since she knew about Yangtze's past, the two of them had been interacting more frequently in private. When they met, they would talk more. If it was in the past, she would at most give Yangtze a cold look. Li Yun smiled and said, "Field Officer Jiang is very brave." Although the few military advisors seemed easy to get along with, they each had their own temperament. Under normal circumstances, Li Yun would rarely disturb them. Chapter 1194. Li Yun used his trump card and the effect was extraordinary. That day, Su Bei was so infuriated that he almost couldn't breathe. Yangtze was a good judge of character. He had long seen Su Bei's fatal advantage. He wanted to save face and suffer. In many situations, face was more important than Su Bei's life. Attacking Su Bei's relatives was not as powerful as attacking his face. Grasping this advantage, Yangtze knew how to scold people. Everything revolved around face, and all words were to serve it. The more Su Bei valued his face, the more Yangtze wanted to rip it off, throw it on the ground and stomp on it. Hearing the spy report that Su Bei had fainted from anger, Yangtze stroked his mustache proudly. His scolding skills were not inferior to Qiguanrang's. The effect of Yangtze's actions was extraordinary. The situation that Xieze had stabilized with great difficulty was once again in turmoil. The number of deserters increased exponentially. It could be predicted that if this situation continued, the morale of the troops would collapse before Shanwu City ran out of ammunition and rations. Jiang Pingji was still unhurried. Not only did she have no intention of attacking the city, but she also had time to tease Wei Ci and contact her allies. Wei Ci remained motionless. His determination left the people around him speechless. Yangtze was one of the earliest to know the truth. Men and women of the same age were already fighting for their fourth or fifth child. Why was Wei Ci still a virgin? This generation's lord was not good enough. Perhaps this was true love, or... Yangtze thought of his new colleague and frowned so tightly that he could squash a fly. How is Bai Ning, whom Zixiao recommended to the Lord 2 days ago? Of course he's a talent. Wei Ci said, "If Jing Rong has any doubts, you can wait and see for his performance in the next battle." After all, Bai Ning was a newcomer, a newcomer of Nanxing nationality. It was normal for him to be evaluated before he was appointed. Yang Si raised his hand to stop him. "No, I'm not doubting your shovel, Ba." He spat in his heart. After hanging out with the frivolous lord for so long, Yang Si couldn't help but be mischievous. For example, the shovel, this time was also learned from the lord. When Wei Xi recommended Bai Ning and his daughter to Jiang Pingji privately teased Wei Xi about the sharpness of his shovel. Yang Si did not understand what it meant. Only later did he realize that it was because of the sharpness of the digging shovel. Inexplicably, Yang Si felt that these words were very interesting. It was as if he had been poisoned. "Wei Xi, Lord, what have you taught them?" Yang Si coughed lightly and finally regained his serious self. He said, "Don't you think that Bai Ning's daughter, Bai Yuexia, is a little strange?" Wei Xi asked, "What's strange?" "She's the same as Commandant Jiang. Both of them are extremely loyal to the Lord. Anyone who isn't blind can see that. It's just that, such a passionate relationship made Si a little worried." Say, the Lord is already." Yang Si stretched out 2 fingers and emphasized Jiang Pingji's age. "The Lord is already 21 years old. The military doctor also said that she is full of energy. As her subjects, we should at least persuade her. No matter if it was a man or a woman, holding it in for too long would harm the body." Wei Xi, the point was, Yang Si continued, "Many people can sense how the Lord treats you, but she hasn't expressed it yet, which makes people worry. I wonder if the Lord is using you as a shield? In fact, she doesn't have feelings for men but for women." Wei Xi, Yang Si didn't want it to be like this, but he had no experience in following a female lord. If a male lord could develop a love story with his male subordinates, then it was actually possible for a female lord to do the same? Otherwise, it couldn't explain why the lord was still holding back when she was 21 years old. No matter how good-looking Wei Xi was, it was an indisputable fact that he was 27 years old. It's not impossible to think of it this way. Commandant Jiang is crazy, and Bai Yuexia seems to have fallen for it. Yang Si continued to say to himself, "Regardless of whether the Lord likes men or women by right, this matter should have nothing to do with us officials." However, the young master is nowhere to be seen. If the Lord is obsessed with women and can't extricate himself, won't such a great foundation be destroyed overnight? This matter will have a great impact. After Bai Yuexia appeared, she and the Lord ate and lived together, went in and out together, and the two of them always had endless topics to talk about. His Lord had always been tender and protective of the fairer sex. Bai Yuexia suffered a lot because of her ugly appearance, so she could win the Lord's love the most. They were so close that Yang Si was so worried that he shaved off his hair. Wei Xi already had a knot in his heart about Bai Yuexia, but Yang Si just had to step on his sore spot. "You're thinking too much. The Lord and her are only discussing the attainments of heavenly works. That Bai Yuexia was once taught by the great son of the school of Moism, so she can be considered half a disciple. If her talents can be put to practical use, who knows how many people will benefit in the future. It's only right that the Lord values her." Wei Xi's words were both to convince Yang Si and to comfort himself at the same time. "But you're right, we can't help bad trends." Yang Si squinted and smiled. "How can we curb bad trends?" "I'll write a letter recommending Bai Yuexia to go to Wanzhou. The front line is dangerous and she's not a female soldier in the female battalion. It won't be good if something happens to her." Wei Xi said with a serious face, "Zhang Ping is also a disciple of the school of Moism, and his attainments in heavenly works are not low. If the two of them work together, they'll be of greater use." Zhang Ping? Yang Si thought of Zhang Ping's character and couldn't help but feel sorry for him. For a black-hearted person like Wei Xi, all friendships were empty. Zhang Ping had met the wrong people in his life and made a bad friend who pushed him into the fire pit. Didn't Wei Xi's conscience hurt? Yes, he's quite suitable. They're both good-looking and talented. Yang Si sighed. Zhang Ping, the model worker far behind, sneezed. He'd been sneezing for the past few days and he didn't know who was thinking about him. Yang Si's imagination ran wild, but Bai Yuexia and Jiang Pingji were really innocent. The latter saw that Bai Yuexia was quite intelligent and had an active mind, so she cherished her talent and planned to train her well. Just as the audience in the streaming room said, if the country was built in the future, this girl might be the best candidate for the Minister of Works. The progress of society was gradual. After certain conditions were met, it would naturally enter the next stage. When Jiang Pingji unified the 5 countries in the future, she didn't intend to be special. She still used the imperial system not because she liked power, How much power could a small farm have? It was only because the imperial system could command power and have the right to guide the development of the entire society. Her will was the will of the entire empire, and no one could defy it. The development of society couldn't be separated from the progress of science and technology. Jiang Pingji didn't think that she could complete the thousands or even tens of thousands of years of human evolution on her own, but she could use the power in her hands to leave the seeds of science and technology in the world and protect them to grow and germinate. As long as they saw the benefits of science and technology and enjoyed the value it created, no class could ignore its appeal. Even without Jiang Pingji's protection, it could still have the soil to survive. Bai Yuexia in front of her and Zhang Ping and Wanzhou were all seeds that she carefully cultivated. Thinking of this, Jiang Pingji's gaze became gentler and more intimate. Bai Yuexia, who was sitting opposite, blushed under her gaze and her heart beat faster. If the Lord was a man, all the women in the world would fall for her. Bai Yuexia took a sip of the tea that Jiang Pingji brewed and felt her whole body full of strength and vitality. Before seeing her idol, Bai Yuexia was perturbed and flustered. She was afraid that Jiang Pingji would despise her appearance, and at the same time she was worried that the real Jiang Pingji couldn't compare to the virtual image in her mind. If that was the case, wouldn't she be disillusioned? It turned out that the real Lord was better than the her she imagined. She was so good that Bai Yuexia didn't dare to imagine. She was obsessed with the celestial machines, and many thoughts could only be bottled up in her heart. But in front of the Lord, she didn't have such concerns. She could talk freely about her ambitions and thoughts. Chapter 1195. Compared to Jiang Pingji's smooth sailing, Su Bei's situation was far from optimistic. The immoral Yang Si could only blame himself for being too vicious. Every word he uttered threw Su Bei's dignity to the ground and trampled on him mercilessly. Su Bei had never been a broad-minded or open-minded person. On the contrary, he was meticulous and sensitive. He would think of all sorts of things at the slightest sign of trouble. His imagination was very developed. There were advantages and disadvantages to such a personality. In the current situation, the disadvantages far outweighed the advantages. Because he was meticulous and sensitive, Su Bei liked to get into a dead end. Once he got in, he couldn't get out. Yang Si fanned the flames from behind. Every day, he ordered the orderly to use a specially made bronze loudspeaker to shout curses outside the mountain urn city. His voice could pass through the city walls and float into the city. Su Bei's morale was high. From his initial rage to his subsequent illness, he was bedridden. Yang Si, this fellow, had contributed greatly. If this was how despicable Yang Si was, then he had overestimated his bottom line. This guy had even more despicable tricks up his sleeve. A normal scolding could no longer satisfy his restless heart. He searched for talents in the army and finally found a guy who had been a ventriloquist in his previous life. Yang Si made him perform a ventriloquist performance in front of the Barbican in the middle of the night. He even made 100 people cooperate with him. The guards of the Barbican were speechless. I have a curse that I must shout in Yang Si's ear. After repeated torment, they were already exhausted. However, they dared not slack off. They were afraid that the other party would seize the opportunity to attack the Barbican. Yang Si grinned. Han Yu is the most cautious person. After 3 to 5 days of trouble, I'm afraid they will collapse. Even a man made of iron had to sleep. With him tormenting the guards of the Barbican, even if Han Yu was extremely capable, he would still be badly battered. Li Yun's smile was a little forced. He once again got to know the military advisor Yang. As expected, when these scholars started to act coquettishly, no one else could do it. According to the scouts' report, the number of deserters in the Barbican has increased significantly. Actually, they could still struggle at death's door by staying in the Barbican. However, Yang Si was too despicable and coquettish. The soldiers were constantly in a state of tension. After a long time, their essence, qi, and spirit would be greatly depleted. If they didn't desert, they would either die or go insane. Yang Si snorted softly and said, "If Su Bei wasn't such a hypocrite, how could he have succeeded so easily?" As the saying goes, men are afraid of entering the wrong profession, and women are afraid of marrying the wrong man. Han Yu didn't choose the wrong profession, but he followed the wrong person. Su Bei could act for a while, but could he really act for a lifetime? Obviously he couldn't. Speaking of Han Yu, Yang Si felt it was a pity that he trusted the wrong person more than once. Many people could only share the hardships and not the joys. Su Bei was a typical example. When he was still a nobody, he worked hard to set up his image and coaxed Han Yu to help him. When he was at his peak, he revealed his fox's tail. He had already succeeded in suppressing Su Fei step by step, so he didn't need to disguise himself and put in the effort to create a public persona. Su Bei's behavior was the exact opposite of Han Yu's Dao. How could the two of them not be estranged? Yang Si understood Han Yu. He understood how painful it felt to have his Dao trampled on by his master. Because what Han Yu was facing now was exactly what Yang Si had experienced. When Yang Si became an official and assisted Prince Changsho, he was sincere at first. Prince Changsho respected the virtuous and treated the poor scholars kindly. Every year he would allocate a large sum of money to help the poor scholars. Every time there was an assessment, Prince Changsho would generously give up his hot spring hotel in Jishan Hot Spring for the scholars to hold gatherings and poetry meetings. All the expenses were taken care of by him. He had also built quite a number of tea houses, specially opened up a place for the students to display their talents, and provided books for the students to read. If there was a student who performed outstandingly, he would even specially recommend that student and give him the first brick on the road to success. To be honest, was Prince Changsho not a wise ruler? Yang Si was attracted by Prince Changsho like this. He recommended himself to be his right-hand man and help him strategize. Similarly, Prince Changsho didn't manage to wear his mask until the end. The royal family of Dongqing had just fallen apart, and he couldn't wait to bare his fangs. Recruiting the poor was only for the sake of setting up a public persona and accumulating prestige. Rather than saying that he valued the poor, it was better to say that he valued his connections. To him, the poor were just used and then thrown away. Yang Si looked at everything coldly and decisively escaped. Before he left, he even tricked Prince Changsho. Compared to Yang Si's decisiveness of, "If you don't have the heart, I'll stop," Han Yu wasn't as carefree. Or did he still have some expectations for Su Bei? Looking at Shanwu City from afar, Yang Si murmured. Li Yun didn't hear it clearly and asked, "What did the military counselor say?" Yang Si asked meaningfully, "Does Han Mei like hypocritical people?" Li Yun shook his head. "Who would like a hypocritical person?" Yang Si laughed. "But what if this hypocritical person insisted on being a hypocritical person for his entire life?" Li Yun was puzzled at first, but then he realized. What's the difference between being a hypocritical person and being truly kind? Yang Si laughed. There's really no difference. Whether it was Su Bei or Prince Changsho, if they could persist in setting up a public persona for their entire lives, so what if they sacrificed their lives and gave their all to assist them? They were equally willing. Unfortunately, both of them didn't persist, so it was expected that they would be abandoned. Before Yang Si left, he said, "Continue to monitor the movements in Shanwu City. Han Yu isn't someone who would resign himself to death." Thinking of Han Yu's face and clean temperament, who would have thought that this refined and elegant young man would have such a ruthless side? He was a ferocious beast. Even if he was on the verge of death, he would save up the last of his strength to bite the flesh of his enemy. He would never be a coward. Yang Si was certain that Han Yu would definitely strike before Shanwu City collapsed, and it would be a ruthless move aimed at the vital parts. But what would Han Yu do? After several days of deployment, Han Yu hadn't had a good night's sleep for a long time. Apart from the clamor outside the city, there was also the mental pressure. He and Cheng Sun came out of the mayor's residence one after the other. He immediately saw Xie Zhe standing outside to ensure their safety. Han Yu lowered his eyelids to hide the disappointment in his eyes. Su Bei had already been forced into a desperate situation by Jiang Pingji's successive tricks. Now he was even more paranoid. He heard that the general had strong yang energy, so he asked Xie Zhe to guard his residence and suppress the yin energy. Because Xie Zhe was his brother-in-law and had a good temperament, there weren't many objections. However, Han Yu was still disappointed. Because Cheng Sun was by his side, Han Yu didn't show his emotions. Xie Zhe stepped forward and said, "Counselor, does the Lord have any instructions?" Han Yu didn't speak, but Cheng Sun said, "The Lord has ordered Captain Xie to lead the operation." Xie Zhe frowned slightly, and a trace of worry flashed in his eyes. "It is my honor that the Lord is willing to entrust me with such an important task. I will not let the Lord down." Cheng Sun had other matters to attend to, so he left first. Xie Zhe walked Han Yu to the door and turned to look at the door. "If anything happens to me and the Lord is able to solve the current predicament, I would like to ask the counselor to take care of the old and young in my family." Xie Zhe lowered his voice and looked at Han Yu sincerely. Han Yu said lightly, "I will." Chapter 1196. Something's not right. Something's really not right. Han Yu should have made his move by now. Why hasn't there been any news? If Yang Si wasn't so confident, he would have doubted his own judgment. Qiguan Rang fanned himself with the feather fan in his hand, trying to disperse the heat around him. Han Yu is not a good person. If his every move is within your calculations, you would have been the one defeated by Gu Su instead of him. He heard Yang Xi's murmur and frowned. In my opinion, Su Bei can only try his luck with a sneak attack if he wants to turn the situation around. Yang Xi replied, the troops in Shanwu City are all under our surveillance. Where would he deploy his troops for a sneak attack? Yang Xi sent his troops to besiege Shanwu City and keep an eye on it 24 hours a day. Any movement in the city couldn't escape the eyes of the scouts. To put it bluntly, they had already figured out the strength of the enemy. How could a group of dispirited soldiers turn the situation around with a sneak attack? He couldn't figure it out. The premise of a successful sneak attack was that the information of the enemy was not equal. Yang Xi had figured out the movements of the enemy. If they dared to sneak attack, they would be sending themselves to their deaths. However, how could Han Yu not see through this? Yang Xi replied, I hate this kind of person. I feel like he's my nemesis. Qiguan Rang's expression turned serious. He agreed with Yang Xi's judgment of Han Yu. He was not a coward who would resign himself to death, but he couldn't figure out Han Yu's thoughts. No matter what, it's always good to be prepared. Qiguan Rang said coldly, order the soldiers to strengthen their night patrols and don't let go of any suspicious characters. At the same time, send people to keep an eye on the movements of Shanwu City to prevent Su Bei from playing any tricks. Su Bei was the leader of the enemy. Letting him go was like letting a tiger return to the mountain or a dragon return to the sea. Yang Xi replied, coping with the changes by remaining unchanged? That's a good idea. We can't figure out Han Yu's movements. Listening to their conversation, Jiang Nongqin was a little confused. The defeat of Shanwu City is set in stone. Does Han Yu still want to struggle? Just look at Su Bei's face and you can tell that he's a short-lived man. Yang Xi smiled helplessly and said, even ants live without purpose, let alone humans. You can't give up just because you're at a disadvantage. History tells us that there are many examples of the weak winning against the strong. If he worked hard, he might win. Jiang Nongqin said, I heard from the 2 military counselors that Han Yu seems to be a talent. Yang Xi said, he's one of Master Yuanjing's 4 disciples. He's from the same sect as me. His talent is no less than mine. Naturally, he's not simple. He is not as good as you. Jiang Nongqin praised indifferently. Her expressionless face was becoming more and more like their lord. The sudden praise made Yang Xi feel flattered. He had worked with Jiang Nongqin for many years, but he had never heard her praise anyone other than the lord. He was the first one. Officer Jiang, I'm really ashamed of your praise, Yang Xi said. I wonder what's so good about me that Officer Jiang thinks highly of me? Tell him that he will definitely carry this merit forward. Jiang Nongqin raised her eyebrows and her lips curled into an unnoticeable smile. Eyes. Yang Xi. He couldn't react for a moment. Did Jiang Nongqin mean that his eyes were better than Han Yu's? Han Yu must be blind to have chosen Su Bei. Jiang Nongqin added, although you've been lost before, at least you've forsaken the darkness for the light. Her lord must be the only wise ruler in the world. Those outstanding people who chose other feudal vassals, if they weren't blind, then what were they? Yang Xi. Brainless, and moronic creatures were simply too terrifying. Bai Yuexia and Jiang Nongqin were like this. He really couldn't believe that his lord didn't use Wei Ci as a shield. Maybe Military Counselor Yang and Military Counselor Qiguan are thinking too much. Jiang Nongqin also had this question in her mind. She pondered for a long time but couldn't find an answer. No matter how one looked at it, Shanqing was already a dead end. Han Yu had to launch a sneak attack to gain a chance of survival if he wanted to have a chance of survival. But the timing of the sneak attack, the number of troops and the terrain. Han Yu didn't have any advantages. From Jiang Nongqin's point of view, it was better to defend Shanqing to the death than to take a risk. Maybe the Lord, Jiang Pingji, would withdraw the troops if they held back. Of course, the possibility was very small. Jiang Pingji was playing chess with Bai Yuexia. Hearing Jiang Nongqin's words, Jiang Pingji supported her chin with her wrist and looked at Jiang Nongqin. I think Wen Zheng and Jing Rong are right to worry. Jiang Pingji smiled. Because when analyzing the battle situation, we not only have to consider the number of troops and the terrain, but also the personalities of our men. Su Bei is bedridden, so Han Yu has become the leader. The troops in Shanqing have to obey his will. In a sense, understanding Han Yu is the same as understanding the overall movement of the enemy. Yang Xi said that Han Yu was not a person who would resign himself to death, so the troops in Shanqing wouldn't really defend Shanqing to the death. Unless, Han Yu was pulled down from his position, and someone else was in charge. According to the information they had so far, the possibility was very small. Then what do you think Han Yu will do, my lord? Jiang Pingji stared at the situation on the chessboard and pondered for a while. He is the only one in Su Bei's camp who is good to watch. I'm looking forward to the surprise he will give me, she said straightforwardly. I don't care what kind of conspiracy he has. I'll take it right here. Su Bei's troops are limited. Even if he attacks with all his strength, he won't be able to hurt me. Jiang Nongqin was very interested in Han Yu, whom she had never met before. She wanted to see how capable Han Yu was to be able to baffle her lord. The night was even noisier than the day. All kinds of small animals ran out and made a lot of noise. For the audience in the streaming room, the nightlife had just begun. For those who worked at sunrise and slept at sunset in ancient times, it was time to sleep. Yang Si was no exception. He washed up and went to bed. There was a bamboo mat under him, and a thin quilt covered his lower abdomen to prevent him from getting cold in the middle of the night. He fell asleep in a daze. Suddenly he remembered something and sat up straight. Oh no, I forgot about this. Yang Si crawled up and grabbed his clothes. He put on his wooden clogs and walked in big strides while packing his clothes. Chiguan Rang's tent was not far away. Yang Si called out a few times from afar, waking up Chiguan Rang, who was about to fall asleep. Yang Jingrong, what are you doing? Yang Si was disheveled. His pajamas were still exposed. His long hair was scattered over his shoulders and back. He had no manners at all. Si suddenly thought of something. Wenjing, do you have any information collected by the scouts? Time is of the essence. Chiguan Rang glanced at the bastard who disturbed his sleep in the middle of the night. He put on his clothes and got up to look for relevant information for him. Yang Si looked carefully with the light of the oil lamp. His face gradually darkened. What's wrong? Chiguan Rang craned his neck to take a look. Yang Si was looking at the deserters that the scouts had found. Ever since the siege of Mountain Urn City, the number of deserters had increased day by day. Su Bei's power had. Something was wrong. Chiguan Rang put the candlestick on the table with a clang and snatched a few rolls of bamboo slips. Well done. What a good move to cross the sea by deceiving everyone. Were the deserters really deserters? Not necessarily. It could be an ambush. Yang Si stood up with the bamboo slips and said hurriedly, we have to inform the Lord about this as soon as possible. Chapter 1197. What a good Han Wenbin. When did he start plotting this? In his shock, Yang Si took a big step forward and almost stepped on the outer garment that had slipped off his shoulder. If Chiguan Rang had not been kind enough to hold him up, he would have fallen. With great difficulty he steadied his feet. His eyes widened as he stared at the orange-red flames burning in the central camp. The orange-red firelight was like colorful ink, forcefully and domineeringly spreading out on the black cloth of the night. Chiguan Rang calculated the time in his mind and found out that Han Yu had planned this before Su Pei entered the barbican. In other words, Han Yu advised Su Pei to retreat to the barbican to stabilize the situation. At the same time, he planned the ambush to turn the situation around. The army surrounded the barbican to deplete their morale and increase the number of deserters. The more deserters there were, the lower the morale of the army and the lower the combat power. Unexpectedly, Han Yu took advantage of this. He put on a show to confuse them and asked the soldiers to pretend to be deserters to leave the barbican. The deserters were young and strong. After they left the barbican, most of them became refugees and bandits. A small number of them sought refuge with Jiang Pingji. Of course, they were the deserters of the lowest level. They couldn't meet Jiang Pingji at all. They were recruited as ordinary soldiers. For the sake of safety, these deserters would be put on probation for a while. They wouldn't be allowed to go to the battlefield. The most they could do was to do some trivial things in the rear, such as washing clothes, setting up camp, and carrying weapons. They wouldn't be allowed to touch things like water and grains. Even so, Yang Si and the others still fell into the trap and Han Yu achieved his goal. The deserters behaved themselves. They only worked in a certain area and didn't show any flaws. When the signal was given, they gathered together and robbed the enemy's weapons, which caught the enemy off guard. The number of deserters who surrendered to Han Yu was not large, but it was not small either. Their sudden attack gave Han Yu the upper hand. Xie Zhe pretended to be a deserter early in the morning and successfully met with the bandits and refugees outside the barbican. He acted according to Han Yu's plan. He was worried about the lack of weapons, grains and horses. He didn't expect that Han Yu had already prepared them. At this moment, Xieze vaguely understood why Han Yu insisted on defending the Barbican and refused to fight no matter how the enemy cursed him. It wasn't that Han Yu didn't want to fight, it was that he had moved some of the supplies outside the city, so the supplies inside the city weren't enough to fight the enemy head-on. In order not to arouse the enemy's suspicion, Han Yu took great pains. Thinking of this, Xieze did not know whether he should admire this military advisor or fear him. Success or failure depends on this. Xieze put on his armor and picked up his weapon. He gathered his troops and prepared to set off. Following Han Yu's arrangement, the operation went smoothly. Although the enemy's defense was tight, the sudden sneak attack still tore a hole in their defense line. He ordered his soldiers to burn down the tents and create chaos. At the same time, he charged towards the main tent of the Central Army. Just as they were about to fall asleep, many people were woken up by the loud horn as soon as they fell asleep. The enemy came in a menacing manner, and the hastily constructed defense could not stop them at all. The enemy actually broke through the layers of defense and arrived at the main camp. The flames of war spread rapidly. At this hour, Li Yun was still awake. When the sneak attack happened, Li Yun was patrolling on the other side of the camp. When he heard that there was an enemy sneak attack, he hurried over. Enemy attack. When Li Yun arrived, he saw that his lord's tent was ablaze. The rest of the camp was also engulfed in a sea of flames. The battle cries of both the enemy and his allies soared to the sky. Looking at the fire on three sides of the main camp, the enemy had at least 10,000 people. In the chaos of war, no one knew where they popped out from. There were 10,000 people. The army was guarding the Barbican tightly. How could these soldiers avoid the scouts' eyes and ears and sneak attack the main camp? Li Yun immediately saw Xieze, who was raising his spear to kill. I will deal with this person. All of you quickly go and find the Lord. Do not disobey. The soldiers said, yes. If anything happened to the Lord, they could atone for their sins with their lives. Li Yun's expression was as cold as ice. He suddenly tightened his grip on the white belly of his warhorse and rushed over with his spear. With a clang, the two spears collided, making a sound that made people's teeth ache. Li Yun skillfully pushed away Xieze's attack with his wrist and blocked his killer move, saving one of his soldiers. Xieze? It's actually you? Li Yun snorted coldly. His spear fiercely attacked Xieze's vital points. If he was hit, it would definitely pierce through his heart. Xieze pursed his lips tightly. He also recognized Li Yun, the young general who had inherited the Xie family's martial arts. Due to the urgency of the war, Xieze had not had the time to ask for instructions from his family. Li Yun's face was illuminated by the orange-red flames, softening the sharpness of his aura. With just one glance, a portrait hanging in his father's study flashed across Xieze's mind. The man in the portrait was dressed in a black Confucian robe. He was dignified and elegant, but did not lose his heroic spirit. His appearance was like the spirit of heaven and earth. This man was 50 to 60% similar to the Li Yun in front of him. In a flash, Xieze remembered the man's identity. He was the eldest son of the Xie family's first line of descent, Xie Qian. If Xie Qian had not met with misfortune, Xieze's father would not have been able to obtain the position of master. Speaking of which, Xie Qian had been dead for more than 20 years. He was the only direct descendant of the Xie family who had not been heard of before the incident. The Li Yun in front of him matched his age and looked so similar to Xie Qian. Could it be? What was the relationship between the two of them? Even though he was full of questions, Xieze did not speak. The moves in his hands became fiercer and more lethal. Li Yun was not to be outdone. He raised his spear and stabbed at his opponent. Blood relationship, my ass. In troubled times one had no choice. The two of them had different standpoints. It was a matter of life and death. How could there be any consideration of feelings? Xieze's side did not have many men. He already had the advantage of surprise. Once the fight dragged on, his situation would not be good. Seeing this, Li Yun immediately switched from offense to defense. He stuck to Xieze like a sticky candy, pestering him until he had no time to care about anything else. Xieze was well aware of his situation. He did not care about the bloody hole Li Yun had created on his body. He simply used the method of exchanging injury for injury. His and Li Yun's martial arts skills were on par. If they really fought with their lives on the line, it was hard to tell who would win. The stubborn were afraid of the unreasonable. The unreasonable were afraid of the reckless. Xieze was determined not to care about his life. Li Yun was in a dangerous situation. Fortunately, this was Li Yun's home ground. Xieze could not kill him without interference. Not long after, Xieze was covered in wounds. Bright red blood flowed from his wounds. You are quite calm. Are you not afraid that Lu Shi will be buried in the sea of fire? Once Lu Shi dies, how can you lowly insects trap the flood dragon? Xieze asked in a hoarse voice as he panted heavily. If it was not for Li Yun's excellent hearing, he would not have been able to hear such a chaotic scene. Who did you say would be buried in the sea of fire? Jiang Pingji's voice traveled into their ears. Chapter 1198. My lord. Li Yun looked in the direction of the voice in surprise, only to see Jiang Pingji in plain white pajamas with a large but elegant cloak draped over her shoulders. Her brows were much softer than they were in the day, her black hair draped over her shoulders and her pajamas were stained with sticky red blood. She looked like a beautiful Rakshasa. She held a black scabbard in her left hand and a long sword with a narrow, straight and shiny blade in her right hand. Blood was still dripping from the blade. The faint cloud patterns on the blade were flowing with blood. It made one's breath tighten for no reason. Li Yun had just called out Jiang Pingji's identity and immediately cursed under his breath. Sure enough, Xieze ignored his injuries and quickly stabbed his spear at Jiang Pingji. The silver-white body of the spear drew a dazzling light in the air. Xieze's spear skills were outstanding. He used his strength to deflect the soldiers in front of Jiang Pingji and aimed the tip of the spear between her eyebrows. Li Yun followed closely, but Xieze's explosive strength was astonishing. He completely disregarded his own life. Even a stab from the spear did not make him pause. Everything happened in a flash, so fast that the bystanders could not react. Jiang Pingji was not in a hurry. Her calm eyes did not stir a single ripple. She flipped her long sword and used the scabbard to block Xieze's all-out attack. She turned around and somersaulted in the air, her long legs stepping on the tip of the spear. Xieze felt an unshakable force hit the body of the spear, forcing him to fall forward. Anmei, what are you panicking for? Jiang Pingji snorted but did not loosen her foot. Xieze's arm was under the spear due to the way he was holding the spear and falling. Jiang Pingji was stepping on the spear so he could not move. Of course, the people around him did not give him a chance to fight back. In the blink of an eye, several long swords were pressed against his neck. Li Yun was pale from the scene just now. He quickly put away his spear and asked for forgiveness. I don't blame you. Get up. Instead of asking for forgiveness here, why not kill a few more enemies and make up for your mistakes? Jiang Pingji looked down at Xieze, who was covered in blood. Her eyes seemed to flash with a hint of blood. But her expression was too calm. The bystanders could not read her mind. Ordinary people could not read it, but Wei Xi could. He rushed over, panting. By the time he arrived, the soldiers had already tied Xieze's hands behind his back and tied him up. Master, Wei Xi's cheeks were very, very red. His ears were bloodshot and they were so red that they were translucent. It's so chaotic outside. Why aren't you waiting in your tent? Jiang Pingji sheathed the god-slaying sword and looked at Wei Xi disapprovingly. The enemy attacked the camp and the situation was chaotic. Even she could not guarantee Wei Xi's safety. Wei Xi said, when the Lord is in danger, how can I hide? Turtle? Jiang Pingji seemed to have thought of something. She snorted and chuckled. You sound so righteous now. Wei Xi could not help but look embarrassed. Before anyone could react, Jiang Pingji said to the soldier, look after this person. Don't let him die. Li Yun replied. Here. As he left, Li Yun suddenly thought of something. He could not help but turn his head to look at his lord and Wei Xi's attire. What was that? Why did the cloak on his lord's shoulders match Zixiao's attire? Was it a set? The thought flashed by. The battle around him pulled his attention back. Li Yun did not continue to think about it. The night attack was huge. It did cause Jiang Pingji a lot of losses, but it was not a serious blow. More than 2 hours passed. The enemy soldiers were dead, injured, and captured. Jiang Pingji sat in the temporary main tent and listened to the post-battle report. She had already changed out of that blood-stained cloak. Everyone present was a shrewd person. If she had worn that cloak just now, everyone would know that their lord had shamelessly attacked Wei Xi in the middle of the night and failed. It would be too embarrassing. As the lord, she could not meet people in her sleeping clothes. To be honest, if Han Yu's night attack was not so timely, Wei Xi might have been killed by her. Jiang Pingji's mood was shrouded in dark clouds. The atmosphere in the tent was oppressive and heavy. Where did this group of sneak attack soldiers come from? Jiang Nongqin did not have a night patrol mission today, so she rested early. The enemy suddenly attacked at night. She did not have time to put on her armor. She picked up her weapon and killed the enemy. Her eyes were bloodshot in the chaotic battle. This is a trap prepared by Han Yu early in the morning. I'm afraid he started the plan as soon as he entered the Barbican, Yang Si said. I sent people to torture the captives. The conclusion we got also confirmed this speculation. Han Yu ordered the elites to pretend to be deserters to avoid the scouts and lower the alertness of our army. As the two armies were in a stalemate, the number of deserters gradually increased. The number was not too small but not too large either. It was all within Yang Si and the others' expectations. Because of this, the people did not look at the deserters suspiciously at first. Sneak attack the main camp of the main army. What a beautiful plan. If the Lord was not in the main camp and had superb martial arts skills, Han Yu's plan might have succeeded. Jiang Nongqin snorted coldly and said darkly, if anything happens to the Lord, I must cut that traitor Han's throat with my own hands. Yang Si shivered involuntarily when he heard her icy voice. He did not dare to doubt the truth of Jiang Nongqin's words. Jiang Pingji sat on the seat of honor and said, it's a good thing that Han Yu's soldiers are in danger, because he has shown his last bargaining chip. There were tens of thousands of soldiers ambushing the camp that night. All the elites had been sent out, which meant that the defense inside the Barbican was very weak. Everyone take a break. Jiang Pingji sneered. Break the Barbican at daybreak. Everyone said, yes. There were still more than 2 hours before daybreak. Jiang Pingji asked them to go back to sleep so that they could recover their energy before attacking the Barbican. However, these people had just gone through a tangled battle. Every one of them seemed to be on steroids. How could they sleep? In the night attack, the newcomer Bai Ning showed the demeanor of an experienced general. If it were not for his timely response to organize the defense and counterattack, the casualties of our army would have been even greater. This made others more certain of Wei Si's shovel. Indeed, when the shovel was used, all the people were talented. Just now. Was the Lord wearing your clothes? Bai Ning moved closer to Wei Si and asked in a low voice. Wei Si staggered and almost fell on the ground. He denied it decisively. It was dark. You must have seen wrongly. Bai Ning curled his lips and snorted in disdain. He was not the only one with a discerning eye. No one else raised any objections. It was obvious that the person beside him had an affair with his lord. Bai Ning said meaningfully, you have to work hard. Although he was a newcomer, his lord was close to his daughter's age. Bai Ning could not help but put himself in the role of an old father. He secretly worried about his lord's next generation. Which of the feudal lords in the world would still have a child at their age? Without the young lord, they would not feel at ease. Wei Si was speechless. The army was ready to go, waiting for the first ray of sunlight to arrive. The atmosphere in the Barbican was so heavy that it could drip water. Han Yu had not slept the whole night with his eyes wide open. Standing on top of the wall, he saw the enemy's camp burning in the distance. His heart was in his throat. Did they succeed? Or did they fail? Han Yu's heart was in turmoil, like a piece of fresh meat boiling in a pan of oil. Chapter 1199. Cough cough cough. Wenbin, did we win? Or did we lose? Su Bei's complexion was haggard and yellowish. His eyes were dark and bloodshot, and his forehead was tied with a gray headband. Yang Si had infuriated him, and Su Bei was a sensitive and thoughtful person. Not only did he not get better after being bedridden, his condition worsened rapidly. It was as if his entire being had been hollowed out. It was difficult for him to even turn over and sit up. He held onto Han Yu's hand tightly with his skinny hand and turned his body sideways to face Han Yu. His widened eyes flashed with desire and urgency. Su Bei licked his dry and cracked lips and said in a hoarse voice, Wenbin, tell me. Han Yu was dressed in a dark green Confucian robe. He knelt beside Su Bei's bed in an upright posture. His calm eyes carried a chilling heaviness. Su Bei didn't know if it was the lighting in the room or if it was an illusion, but he noticed that Han Yu's long hair wasn't as black and silky as it used to be. Su Bei couldn't help but hold onto Han Yu's right hand tightly. He stared at Han Yu's lips without blinking, hoping that Han Yu's mouth would reveal some good news. Han Yu didn't speak for a long time. The two of them were in a stalemate in silence for a long time. Silence was better than words. Although Han Yu didn't say the answer, Su Bei already understood. Did we lose? So that's how it is. Su Bei let go of Han Yu's hand. His body that was lying on his side lost its support and he fell back onto the bed weakly. He stared at the ceiling of the sleeping quarters with lifeless eyes. His already heavy and powerless body became even more tired, as if someone was dragging him down. I knew this day would come. I didn't expect it to come so soon. In the end, I underestimated Lanting. Su Bei's tightly knitted eyebrows relaxed. His expression was strangely calm, and there was no trace of the hysteria he had shown a few days ago. He asked, "Are they going to attack?" Han Yu then said, "The enemy has already started to attack the city. The city is empty of soldiers and supplies. I'm afraid we won't be able to defend until sunset." Su Bei tilted his head to look at Han Yu. Even such a simple action seemed to require a lot of effort. "Wenbin, you and I are lord and minister. There is one thing that I, Pei Ho Yen, would like to plead with you. I hope that Wenbin will consider it carefully." Su Bei panted and said in a weak voice, "Shi County has already fallen into the hands of Lanting, but the whereabouts of the people in the residence are still unknown. Pei is worried. If Wenbin has the strength to spare, please take care of them in the future and protect their lives. This way, Pei will be able to smile even in the underworld." Han Yu gazed deeply at Su Bei. "My lord, you don't have to persuade me. I know what to do. If I admit defeat to Lanting, according to her temperament, she will probably lock me up and treat me like an idler. As long as I know my place and don't cause trouble, I won't have to worry about my life for the rest of my life. However, this isn't what I'm seeking." Su Bei coughed a few more times. His calm eyes flickered with a scarlet color, as if a terrifying beast was lurking within. His gaze was firm and decisive. "Furthermore, even Su Lingwen has the courage to fight to the death. Why would I be afraid of death? If I drag out an ignoble existence now, I'm afraid that he will laugh at me to death." Han Yu pursed his lips tightly. His complexion became paler and paler, as if a thick layer of white ash had been applied to his face. "Yes." Upon hearing Han Yu's promise, a faint blush appeared on Su Bei's yellowish cheeks, as if he had been injected with a new lease of life. He made a move to stand up, but Han Yu raised his hand to help him up. "Wenbin, help me prepare a brush and ink. When the time comes, I'll have to trouble you to deliver my family letter." Han Yu helped him get the brush and ink. Su Bei's fingers trembled as he lifted the brush. Before the tip of the brush could land, it fell onto the table with a clang. The ink splashed onto the table, forming several round black stains. He gritted his teeth and picked up the brush again. Although it didn't fall this time, the words he wrote were weak and feeble. Rather than calling it a family letter, it would be more accurate to call it a suicide note left behind by Su Bei for his family. There was nothing special in the contents of the letter. He urged his son to study hard and become a talented person who would benefit the people of the world and the country when he grew up. He also urged his daughter to not forget the teachings of her parents and to be filial to her in-laws and to respect her legal mother after she reached marriageable age. He also urged his wife to take care of the family business. If she met a suitable man in the future, she could take half of the family's wealth and remarry. When Su Bei finished the last stroke, he had used up almost all of his strength. Han Yu silently dried the letter for him, added wax and loaded it into the letter. "It's been hard on you all these years." Su Bei seemed to have lost all of his strength. He hunched his back and sat in front of the table, watching as Han Yu put the letter into his pocket. Han Yu replied, "It's not hard." For Han Yu, his past experiences were all attempts. Regardless of whether he won or lost, they were all invaluable experiences. The only way he could avoid the same pitfalls in the future was to learn his lesson and avoid the same pitfalls in the future. Su Bei's lips opened and closed. His dry eyes seemed to be brimming with tears. He didn't say a single word for a long time. The sun in the sky had already begun to incline to the west. Su Bei said quietly, "Wenbin, you can leave. I want to be alone for a while." Han Yu silently stood up and walked to the door before stopping. "Xian Zhao, do you still remember that year when we first met in the waterside pavilion? When you and I talked about the situation of the world and expressed our thoughts, what did you promise me?" Su Bei was startled. His slow brain didn't react immediately. He spent a lot of effort to search for that memory and said with uncertainty, "To look at the beautiful mountains and rivers together?" Han Yu replied without turning his head, "Xian Zhao, do you still remember it? Are you going to break your promise now?" "I'll have to trouble Wenbin to look at it for me." Su Bei smiled bitterly. "If Lanting ascends to the throne, remember to come to my grave and inform me. If he lost to such a person, he wouldn't have died in vain." Although Su Bei was born into an aristocratic family, he also wanted the world to be at peace. He was afraid that he wouldn't be able to see it now. Han Yu's eyes dimmed a little. "All right." Not long after Han Yu left, he bumped into Cheng Sun, whose clothes were stained with blood. "Where's the Lord?" Han Yu replied, "In the house." Cheng Sun looked at Han Yu from head to toe and suddenly understood everything. Why didn't you persuade the Lord to break out of the encirclement? Cheng Sun gritted his teeth and said angrily, Han Wenbin, I originally respected you, but now I see that I was blind. As a subject, you don't do your best for the Lord. Instead, you want to let go at a time of crisis. What are you doing to the Lord? Han Yu said, I tried my best. He had used his final trump card, but he still couldn't kill Lu Shi. His defeat was inevitable. Cheng Sun's anger didn't abate. Looking at Han Yu's indifferent reaction, he became angrier. He scolded, if the master is humiliated, the subject must die. If the master dies, the subject must die too. Are you afraid of death? The enemy hasn't even entered the city, but you've already thought of all the escape routes. Are you trying to use us to curry favor with Thief Lu? Han Yu looked at Cheng Sun coldly. Fame is a worldly possession. I don't need to care about what others say. If you think I'm afraid of death, I have nothing to say. Cheng Sun was so angry that his fingers were trembling. You have betrayed the Lord's trust. Chapter 1200. A clear conscience? Cheng Sun sneered. How do you have the cheek to say that? Han Yu responded indifferently. Just like what he had told his mentor, Master Yuan Jing, his Tao was law and justice, not a specific person. He wanted to put his ideas into practice and help the people create a fair and just society. Even if he couldn't do it, he still hoped to pass on his Tao so that his descendants could see it. At the end of the day, it didn't matter who brought about this golden age. It would be great if it was Su Bei, but it would be a pity if it wasn't him. Han Yu said, I'm different from you. You don't understand. I don't understand. I hope that if you surrender to Lu Shi, he will forgive you for raiding the main camp at night. Cheng Sun didn't understand and didn't want to understand. He sneered, Han Wenbin, I hope that you have a bright future. Next year you will have 3 ministers and 9 ministers. Cheng Sun used to like Han Yu in the mirror, but he didn't know that Han Yu's nature was like this. Even if his lord didn't want to leave, he should persuade her. If he couldn't, he would die with his lord. How could he drag out an ignoble existence? He didn't know that Han Yu knew Su Bei too well. Su Fei was trapped in the Barbican and failed to escape after the city was breached. He hung himself in the farmhouse's courtyard in despair. Su Bei didn't want to lose to Han Yu, and he didn't want to follow his old path. It was impossible for him to escape. It would be futile to persuade him. Han Yu looked down coldly. Thank you for your kind words. For Han Yu, life and death weren't scary. What was scary was that his death would be meaningless. Everyone had their own choices. Cheng Sun was loyal to his lord and wasn't afraid of death, but he was loyal to his heart and Tao. He couldn't die yet. Cheng Sun was furious. He put his right hand on the hilt of the sword at his waist and pulled it out to stab Han Yu. Han Yu couldn't dodge in time. His left upper arm was pierced, and his whole arm was soaked with blood. If Cheng Sun had moved a little more to the side, he might have hit Han Yu's heart and killed him. Cheng Sun pulled out his sword and wanted to stab again. He didn't expect Han Yu to be so fast. He also pulled out his sword to defend. Cheng Sun's sword stopped in midair. He couldn't stab a second time. Finally, he threw his sword away angrily. Humph! He despised people like Han Yu who had no backbone the most. Killing him would only dirty his hands. Han Yu had no choice but to put his sword back into the scabbard. He covered the wound on his left arm with his right hand and smiled bitterly. This was the saying, those who walk different paths cannot make plans together. Although the terrain of Shanwu City was treacherous, when Su Fei was stationed here, Su Bei had forcefully demolished the buildings. Now that he was trapped in Shanwu City, those buildings that had not been repaired in time became his greatest burden. On Jiang Pingji's side, she had been suppressing a bellyful of anger. The firepower used to attack the city was extremely fierce. The generals and soldiers started attacking the city at dawn. Apart from resting and reorganizing a few times in the middle, they spent the rest of the time violently demolishing the city. Jiang Pingji tore the city gate with her bare hands and led the troops to break through the gate of the Barbican. Bai Ning, the main force of the left corps, was dumbfounded. So there was this kind of operation in war? No, wasn't that their lord? Why did she have to personally lead the charge on the battlefield? Even ordinary generals wouldn't easily go down to the battlefield to kill the enemy. Why were you so excited as a lord? With his good eyesight, Bai Ning was sure that not only was his master excited, but she was also trembling with excitement. Oh no, will my daughter still be able to get married? He could only blame his lord for being too charming. She was like a god of death descending on the battlefield, perfectly displaying the beauty of her strength. Which young lad could resist her? Regardless of whether it was a man or a woman, they all admired the strong. Otherwise, why would there be the saying, "Beauties love heroes"? Not only was his lord beautiful, but she also had the strength to suppress countless heroes. Wouldn't his Wuxia's soul be hooked by such an outstanding person? When Bai Ning thought about this and saw those ugly enemies, he was even more furious. His archery skills were excellent and he was also good at commanding troops. After Wei Si's recommendation, Jiang Pingji appointed Bai Ning as the dubois of the military camp, which was equivalent to the dubois commander. However, Bai Ning was a first-line combatant. There were many opportunities for him to render meritorious service. Coupled with his own abilities, he could be promoted in a short period of time. Otherwise, if she gave Bai Ning a high position from the beginning, it would be difficult to convince the other soldiers. Bai Ning did not disappoint Jiang Pingji's arrangements. He performed outstandingly in a few small battles. The siege this time was also very eye-catching. Jiang Pingji could tear the city gate with her bare hands. If Bai Ning did not lead the troops to provide cover and assistance, it would not have been so easy to conquer Shanwu City. The war drums roared and the sound of killing shook the heavens. The smell of blood rushed to the sky. Countless broken limbs and corpses were piled up on the city wall. Bright red blood seeped into the mud, mixing with the smell of mud and wafting in all directions. Although the city gate was broken, the remaining soldiers did not scatter in all directions. There were still some who stayed behind to resist. In the end, they were killed or captured. "You do have some skills," Jiang Pingji spat and swung the long sword in her hand in the air. The fresh blood on the blade was flung away, and the sword returned to its original white and shiny body. If it were an ordinary soldier, he would not have the slightest intention to resist in such a disadvantageous situation. He would have either surrendered or fled. The remaining soldiers in Shanwu City were stubborn. It was obvious that they were the last elite troops under Su Pei's command. Jiang Pingji did not let her men kill them all. Instead, she ordered them to kill those who could be captured and those who could not be captured. The three armies marched straight into Shanwu City. Before the sun completely sank below the horizon, the last line of defense in Shanwu City was broken. The night sky gradually darkened. The flames in Shanwu City grew brighter and brighter. The sky was dyed with an orange halo. Jiang Pingji glanced at it. The orange light reflected in her eyes. She suddenly guessed something. "Su Xinjiao." "What?" she murmured and sighed. Her murderous aura was completely restrained. She did not look as happy as before. Instead, she looked regretful. The audience was still chatting and chatting. Their relaxed mood made Jiang Pingji's heart sink. She did not have a deep friendship with Su Pei, but they had been brothers in the past. They were half-friends. On the other side, Cheng Sun's face was covered in tears. He hugged a wooden bucket and fetched water from a water jar in an attempt to extinguish the fire. However, the main buildings in Shanwu City were made of wood. Coupled with the dry weather, the fire spread extremely fiercely. How could he extinguish it? There were only a few servants and soldiers fetching water to extinguish the fire. It was like trying to put out a burning cart of firewood with a cup of water. In the end, Cheng Sun made up his mind. He raised the wooden bucket filled with water above his head and poured the water on himself. He wet the thick blanket brought by his servant and draped it over his body. Then he dashed into the sea of fire. The fire in the room was so strong that he choked and coughed. He could vaguely see a charred corpse on fire. He covered the charred corpse with a thick quilt and dragged it out without any mishap. My lord, why did you abandon Gong Luo?" The charred corpse was burnt beyond recognition. However, Cheng Sun could still recognize its identity at a glance. Chapter 1201. Cheng Yuan did not expect to see his elder brother under such circumstances. Cheng Sun knelt beside a charred corpse as if he had lost his soul. The surrounding wooden buildings were burnt to a crisp. "Eldest brother," Cheng Yuan called out tentatively, his eyes filled with suspicion and uncertainty. Because of the large age gap between the two brothers, Cheng Yuan's deepest impression of his elder brother was the figure of him studying hard under the window. Words like playful and lazy would never have anything to do with Cheng Sun. After Cheng Sun got married, he took his wife to another place to be an official. Cheng Yuan followed his father, so the two brothers did not have much contact. Even so, the two were closer than ordinary brothers of the gentry. Cheng Yuan also respected and admired his elder brother. After so many years, Cheng Yuan still wanted his elder brother to see how he had grown. The two brothers sat down to reminisce and chat about their daily lives. Unfortunately, the world made fools of people. Cheng Sun became an official to Su Bei, and Qing Yuan worked for Jiang Pingji. The two brothers were enemies. When two tigers fought, one would definitely be injured. Su Bei had failed and Cheng Sun was about to become a prisoner. Qing Yuan was afraid that the soldiers would hurt Cheng Sun, so he hurried over. Perhaps he was luckier. Qing Yuan did not take many detours before he found Cheng Sun. He ordered the soldiers to retreat and went straight forward to stand beside Cheng Sun. The air was filled with the strange smell of burnt flesh, along with the nauseating smell of blood and iron. Qing Yuan's gaze shifted to the charred corpse. A bold idea crept into his heart. Eldest brother looked like this. Could this charred corpse be Su Bei? Before he could come up with an answer, Cheng Sun moved his stiff neck. His eyes were bloodshot. Gong Liao, I didn't expect you to come. Cheng Sun was still unwilling to accept reality, but Qing Yuan's appearance caused his last line of defense to collapse. Qing Yuan saw that his elder brother was in a bad mood and did not dare to speak, lest he triggered Cheng Sun's sensitive and fragile nerves. Without waiting for Qing Yuan to speak, Cheng Sun laughed coldly and asked, "You want to bring people to capture me? I was afraid that the soldiers would be careless and offend you. That's why I hurried over. Even if I capture you, I won't allow them to hurt or humiliate you. You can rest assured about this." Qing Yuan said honestly, "Come to think of it, eldest brother has been away from home for 10 years. Father and mother miss eldest brother very much. The two elders are getting on in years, why don't you go back and visit them?" Qing Yuan subconsciously brought up his old parents. At the mention of his parents, Cheng Sun's numb gaze became a little more rippling, like the surface of a lake that was wrinkled by the breeze, but it quickly disappeared. "It's my fault for not being able to serve my parents. I'll have to trouble Gong Liao in the future." Qing Yuan's heart skipped a beat. An ominous premonition crept into his heart and he could not get rid of it no matter what. "What do you mean by that, eldest brother?" Qing Yuan asked. "It is the responsibility of a son to serve his parents. You are still the eldest son of the family." He had a premonition that if he didn't wake Cheng Sun up, he might do something crazy. Our Lord was defeated and forced to burn himself. With such a deep hatred, Gong Liao, as an official, don't you think I should avenge our Lord? Cheng Sun raised his hand to shake off Qing Yuan's hand and struggled to stand up. He had been kneeling for too long. His legs were numb and swollen. If he hadn't used his willpower to support himself, he would have collapsed a long time ago. Qing Yuan's face paled. If Cheng Sun was seeking revenge, wouldn't that mean? He shuddered. Qing Yuan was certain that his elder brother wanted to stir up trouble, or that the other party's emotions weren't right. "Our Lord has given me a new lease on life," Cheng Sun said. Qing Yuan gritted his teeth. He wished he could shake his elder brother's shoulder to wake him up. What kind of bewitching potion did Su Bei feed him? Duke Xan Zhao has already been defeated. The winner is king and the loser is the bandit. Since ancient times, it has been this cruel. If the person who was defeated today wasn't Duke Xan Zhao but our Lord, do you think Xan Zhao would be magnanimous enough to let her off? It was Duke Xan Zhao's own choice to burn himself and wasn't forced. What hatred is there? It was true that a scholar would die for a bosom friend. Qing Yuan also admired those famous scholars of unquestionable integrity. However, when these words were used on his own family, Qing Yuan couldn't accept it no matter what. Eldest brother Cheng Sun had parents, children, and a virtuous wife who married him. What right did Cheng Sun have to abandon everything and follow his former master without a second thought? Chaos had begun to appear in the 5 countries. There were 40 to 50 feudal lords of various sizes in Dongqing alone. Most of them didn't even cause a stir before they were swallowed up by the neighboring feudal lords. Su Bei was merely following their old path. His elder brother had only been serving under Su Bei for 3 to 4 years. Qing Yuan didn't think much of Su Bei. Why did his elder brother become so stubborn? Cheng Sun laughed coldly, his words powerful and resonant. "I swear to die before surrendering to Lu Shi, and I won't associate myself with such a despicable person." No matter how well Jiang Pingji did in Cheng Sun's eyes, she wasn't orthodox. She was born into an aristocratic family, yet she did despicable things. She was friendly to the poor but alienated the aristocratic families. All these years she had done everything under the banner of serving the people. She was but a sanctimonious hypocrite. To put it bluntly, she was just carrying the banner of righteousness and plotting for herself. She was a rebel who didn't respect the orthodoxy. Apart from Su Bei's self-immolation, Cheng Sun similarly couldn't accept working with a group of people who couldn't be seen in public after he surrendered. Qing Yuan was anxious and angry. How could his lord allow others to casually slander her? Even if this person was his elder brother, he couldn't. Our Lord is a wise ruler who truly has the ambition to pacify the four seas. Even father agrees and affirms her. Why is elder brother so stubborn? Qing Yuan regretted his words as soon as he said them. He didn't regret retorting, but he regretted speaking too harshly. Cheng Sun snorted in contempt. How can a boorish and lowly man accomplish anything? Qing Yuan didn't want to argue with him, lest the two brothers get angry. Elder brother, why don't you calm down and think about your parents, sister-in-law, and nieces and nephews at home? Is Su Bei really worth your trust? He was born into an aristocratic family, but he's definitely not the wise ruler you're looking for. Even if it's not the Lord, he'll be defeated by someone else, Qing Yuan said. Elder brother, you despise the Lord and are unwilling to submit and become an official. It's good to be idle at home. When the world is at peace, it's not impossible for you to become an official and show your ambitions. Qing Sun laughed coldly. People who walk different paths can't make plans together. He and Lu Shi would never walk the same path. He would rather die if he had to work for this person or rely on his whims. Qing Yuan was helpless. He could only harden his heart and summon someone to temporarily detain Qing Sun. This was to prevent Qing Sun from doing anything irrational in the heat of the moment. Su Bei had just died. Moreover, he had set himself on fire. Such a death was a huge blow to Qing Sun's spirit. Unexpectedly, Qing Sun drew his sword to defend himself. Due to his status, the soldiers didn't dare to be ruthless. Instead, they stabbed him several times. Qing Sun laughed coldly, his expression crazed. Out of the corner of his eye, he glanced at the stone wall in the courtyard and a trace of hatred flashed across his heart. No! Qing Yuan's arm was injured by Qing Sun while he was trying to stop him. Before he could regain his senses, he saw Qing Sun crash into the wall. A muffled thud sounded in the air. Chapter 1202. What Qing Sun said quickly reached Jiang Pingji's ears. She listened in silence for a long time without any expression. After a long while she said, after all, he was Mr. Wenfu's eldest son and Gong Liao's eldest brother. The dead should be respected, and the grudges between them should be written off. He was willing to sacrifice himself for his master, so I couldn't argue with him. Let Gong Liao collect it and bring it back to be buried. It was impossible for Jiang Pingji to say that it was not popular. At the same time, she felt somewhat helpless. According to what she had been taught since childhood, suicide was an act of cowardice. Whatever the reason, it was despicable. Jiang Pingji would rather give her head to someone else than end her own life. She could not understand Qing Sun's choice. Selfishly speaking, she would rather have a confrontation with Qing Sun in front of her. It was better than slamming into the wall and committing suicide in front of Qing Yuan. He would rather die, but if he did so, how would his wife and children, as well as his parents, be able to handle themselves? Jiang Pingji thought of Qing Qing, whose hair had turned white. She frowned. The livestream viewers were dumbfounded the entire time. First, Su Pei had set himself on fire, then Qing Sun had slammed his head into the wall. Although they had different standpoints, many people still sighed when they heard the news. The ones who were the most heartbroken were those who used to be Su Bei's fans. Back then, Su Bei was also a gentle and elegant gentleman who had garnered many fans. Secret dried plum, it's not scary to lose. As long as there's life, there's hope. Why is Su Bei so stubborn? Jiuqian Zambawang, the world is in chaos. This is a tragedy for the Su brothers. Su Fei was forced to hang himself by Su Bei, and Su Bei burned himself in the face of desperation. To them, as long as they take a step back, they won't have to die. Even if they lose their former glory, it won't be a problem for them to be an ordinary rich man. The question is, can their pride tolerate this outcome? He would rather die than live an ignoble life. Everyone has their own ambitions and this is their own choice. Outsiders will at most sigh with emotion. To put it in an inauspicious way, if our host is also faced with this kind of situation where she has to drag out an ignoble existence to survive, according to her temperament, she will most likely make the most intense choice, right? It was not difficult to live, but it was difficult to take a step back. Whether it was Su Fei or Su Bei, if they were willing to surrender, they would be able to preserve their lives. However, neither of them was willing to do so. To them, self-esteem was more important than life. Death was not scary, but surviving required great courage. Therefore, their deaths were already destined. If Su Bei's death could still be understood, then Qing Sun's suicide by ramming his head into the wall had sparked discussion among the audience. Everyone had their own opinions. Many viewers were impressed by his loyalty, but another group of viewers did not agree. Cheng Sun's loyalty to his lord, Su Bei, was very deep, but what about his duties as a son, a husband, and a father? Don't forget Mr. Ching wasn't young in this era. Suddenly hearing the news of his eldest son's suicide, would he be able to take the blow? The audience had never seen Cheng Sun before. They only labeled him as Ching Cheng's eldest son, and Ching Yuan's elder brother. His death was straightforward, but how long would it take for his family to recover from this? If it was a conspiracy theory, would Cheng Sun's wife and children blame the streamer, Jiang Pingji? Just this thought alone made the audience's impression of Cheng Sun even worse. If it wasn't for the phrase, "the dead should be respected," Cheng Sun's name would probably be hung up and scolded by them. After conquering the Barbican, there were still many things that needed to be dealt with. As the Lord, Jiang Pingji could toss the trivial matters to her subordinates, but there were some things that she had to deal with personally, such as taking over Su Bei's family assets and recruiting talents who could still be used. Of course, ordinary people didn't need Jiang Pingji to deal with them. They didn't have that kind of power, but Han Yu was different. It's been many years. How are you, Wenbin? Jiang Pingji and Han Yu were considered schoolmates. She had known Han Yu before she went to Langyi to study, so the two of them could be considered friends. Han Yu wasn't tied up, but he was confined to a small tent and couldn't go out. Although he looked a little haggard, his eyes were bright. His vigor didn't make him look like a prisoner at all. Jiang Pingji casually sat on the other side of the table in front of Han Yu and secretly sized up the young man opposite her. Han Yu asked, "What are you looking at, Master Lanting?" Jiang Pingji said, "I've heard that time is like a knife, and every knife makes one grow old. But God is partial to Wenbin, and it doesn't seem to be applicable to you. I still remember the first time I saw Wenbin on the bank of Ishui River. He was as beautiful as a painting and he was stunning." Han Yu was indeed stunning when he was young. Many people in the audience still had postcards with high-definition screenshots of that time. He was a tall young man in a blue scholar's robe. His skin was as delicate as flawless porcelain. He had bright eyes, red lips, white teeth, and a natural smile. It seemed that no amount of words could describe how good he was. Han Yu's expression didn't change. He smiled faintly and said, "I think it's more appropriate to say that to Zixiao. If Jiang Pingji was a man, those words would be at most a little gay." The relationship between a lord and her subjects had always been very close, but it was also very pure. There were many lords who wrote love letters to their subjects in history. But Jiang Pingji was a woman, so her words seemed a little ambiguous. "I'm just lamenting how fast time flies and how fate plays tricks on people. I have no intention of disrespecting you." Jiang Pingji waved her hand and explained. She didn't want the grape trellis in the backyard to collapse. "You at that time couldn't have imagined the situation today?" Han Yu frowned and asked, "Me at that time? What about Lord Lanting? Did you foresee that?" "Of course I did. I, Lu Shi, am not a person who is willing to live in peace." Jiang Pingji smiled and said, "Don't you think that Dongqing was so rotten that it was suffocating? Rotten things should be dug out early so that new flesh can grow. Leaving the rotten flesh without treatment will only make the wound covered with luxurious brocade, which will only make the flesh inside rot deeper and more serious. I would rather die a heroic death than die a nameless death." She had the genes to cause trouble in her veins. "Rotten?" Han Yu raised his eyebrows and asked calmly, "Where?" Han Yu had analyzed Jiang Pingji many times, but he didn't give a detailed analysis. Only now that he was in close contact with her, he realized that the real Jiang Pingji was very different from the person he had imagined. The other lords would try to cover up their shame no matter how unbearable they were. But Jiang Pingji was straightforward and not afraid of slander. Was she not scheming at all, or was she too open? Now it seemed that it was the latter. Merits and demerits would be judged by later generations. Chapter 1203. Before Han Yu could open his mouth, the audience in the streaming room was already boiling like boiling water. "Miji Swan Mei Tang, get out of the way, everyone. The streamer is going to use her trump card. Attention, high energy ahead. The target, Han Yu, is about to be caught." Tudu Feichio. As a veteran in the streaming room, I have witnessed the streamer seducing all kinds of talents with my own eyes. Do you think I'm lucky enough to buy a lottery ticket? According to the streamer's character, Han Yu will most likely be recruited by her. Piggy Peppa. Can she summon the dragon god and ascend to the throne after gathering 7 talents? Gui Kai Guofengxiu. The streamer has been streaming for so many years. When has she ever failed to recruit talents? Inueja Zhuge Qinma. It's enough for you to be naughty for a while. Isn't it boring to be naughty for tens of thousands of times? I don't think it's that easy for the streamer to win Hanyu. The ancient people were different from the modern people. The ancient elites all had their own tempers and ambitions. They all had their own criteria for choosing their lord. If the streamer can't hit Hanyu's weak spot, how can she win his heart? Although Hanyu used to be in Su Bei's camp, he was still Master Yuanjing's disciple. His card attribute was SSR. Can't you show some respect? Free Lemon. The person above is also playing the same game. Hold your baby tight and draw Hanyu's SSR card last night. Bao Bao Lai Kai Tang. Same to the person above. I'm waiting for the game officials to release a more detailed instance of Hanyu's card. Jiang Pingji's streaming room had spawned a series of doujin properties. Some time ago there was a CGI money-eating game with the core of collecting cards. The players were invisible people who traveled through a different world. They spent money to draw cards. Each card had a different attribute and could open different game branches. Each card came with a different instance, such as a parade, a flower party, a poetry party, a hunting party. As long as the favorability was high enough and the amount of money spent was high enough, the players could get married after their favorability reached a certain level. The most ridiculous thing about the game was that there was no limit on the number of players and gender. In other words, as long as the players had enough money and were lucky enough, they could even get married. Hanyu used to be in Su Bei's camp. Even though he was also one of the 4 disciples of Master Yuanjing, the number of character cards he had was far less than Wei Ci and the others. This made it difficult for the players to gain Hanyu's favor faster. Naturally, they could not conquer him. Seeing that Hanyu was about to be recruited by Jiang Pingji, the game officials didn't have to worry about not having enough material to increase their favorability in the instance dungeon. A group of fans who were obsessed with Hanyu's looks couldn't help but rub their hands. Because a few players were setting the pace, the atmosphere in the live stream room was developing in a more lackluster direction. On the other hand, Jiang Pingji had no time to care about that. She stared at Hanyu and waited for his reaction. Hanyu was not a young boy. How could he be easily fooled by her? Everyone knew how to say nice things. In terms of this skill, she would not be able to catch up to Su Bei even if she activated the firestorm wheels on her feet. Hanyu wasn't fooled by her. Instead, he sneered, "Who made the law?" The execution of the law required absolute authority, and there was no authority in the world higher than that of a king. You're letting the law made by the king punish the king. Isn't this the same as letting a monkey watch the peach orchard? Away from here. It is a divine beast that can distinguish between right and wrong, and is impartial and impartial. Hanyu continued, the king orders people to make the law, to restrain his subjects and people, but he can't restrain himself. Because once the law harms his own interests, he can order people to revise the law. How could such a law be fair and impartial? That was the greatest injustice in the first place. Moreover, how many years has this saying been passed down for the subjects to be punished the same as the common people? It's just a bunch of fools. How many people have actually done it? What's the use of saying nice things? Wasn't what Su Bei said to persuade Hanyu to become an official better than the person in front of him? What happened in the end? After a few years, Su Bei and Hanyu gradually drifted apart. Hanyu didn't show much reaction on the surface, but he was extremely disappointed in his heart. Hanyu, who had been fooled once, naturally wouldn't take the bait so easily. It was the same logic as a girl who had been hurt in love, and it was difficult for a scumbag to fall for a second time. As soon as Hanyu said this, the salted fish in the live stream room sent Jiang Pingji countless messages and kept calling for Hanyu. Although they were all on the streamer's side, they were still happy to see the streamer being humiliated. Jiang Pingji smiled and said, "So, what do you want to hear from me, Wenbin?" Hanyu said, "I want to hear whatever the Duke of Lanting said just now." Jiang Pingji thought for a while and crossed her arms in front of her chest. "You want to hear a law that can punish the king. Unfortunately, it can't be realized now. It's not that I don't want to give you such a law, it's just that the time is not ripe yet. Wenbin, have you heard of the Mirage?" "Mirage? Of course I have heard of it." Hanyu nodded. "Why did you say that the time is not ripe yet? Let me put it another way. When is the time considered ripe?" Jiang Pingji said, "In my opinion there are 3 main aspects: land, people, and technology." Hanyu frowned as he listened. What Jiang Pingji said was far from what he wanted. She just said that she needed a law that could punish the king and regulate the people, but now she said that the time was not ripe yet. Wasn't she going back on her words? However, he still listened patiently. "How do you explain these 3 aspects?" Jiang Pingji scratched her head. She was born in the army and she was a genetic warrior who didn't pass the cultural test. She didn't like this kind of cultural test. But she was determined to get the person in front of her. If she couldn't get him, she would lose her face. It was okay to be despised and laughed at by others, but she would lose her face if she was laughed at by 850,000 people. Jiang Pingji said, "First land. Whether it's the aristocratic families or the royal family, they seize and annex land for nothing but profit and the value of the land. When the value of the land is not enough to attract them, the land is no longer a fat piece of meat for them, but a bone that has been gnawed away. It's dispensable. However, land is the lifeblood of the people. It's the root of their food and clothing." Han Yu followed her train of thought and asked, "Is it possible?" "Of course it's possible." Jiang Pingji said, "Isn't it the same for merchants? Scholars, farmers, merchants are lowly. They pursue profit by nature. They are all people who harm others for their own benefit. If we support them, the country will not be able to govern." Han Yu was a little disappointed. Could it be that he had expected too much from this person? Jiang Pingji shook her head and smiled. "No. Merchants pursue profit, but you can't deny that the prosperity of a place is inseparable from the merchants. This group is a double-edged sword. If used well, they can make two places exchange what they need, and even the poorest place can be full of vitality. Of course, supporting them is not without conditions. If we want to sharpen the merchants into the most powerful weapons, we can't do without the commercial law. Maybe the taxes that the merchants pay to the country are dozens or even hundreds of times higher than that of the farmers." Chapter 1204. Why did all the kings throughout the ages want to tie their people to the fields? Not only was it convenient for the ignorant people to rule, but the most important reason was the lack of farming labor. If there was not enough food, people would starve to death. During the period of the 16 kingdoms, commerce had also prospered for a time, but why did the rulers of the various countries tacitly suppress the merchant community? Wasn't it to let the merchants who had entered the trade return to their fields, and let those who hadn't entered the trade continue to be obedient farmers? Encouraging business development would cause big trouble sooner or later. Jiang Pingji smiled and asked, "Why does Wenbin think that the fields will be abandoned? What if one person could grow enough food to feed thousands of people? What if one person could easily cultivate hundreds of thousands of acres of land? When the time comes, there won't be a lack of people to farm, and the surplus young adults will naturally have to find another way out." Han Yu was furious at Jiang Pingji's words. If not for the fact that he was still a captive, he would have left in a huff. One person supporting thousands and tens of thousands? One person farming hundreds or thousands of mu of land. Wake up. You haven't woken up from your daydream. Han Yu felt that Su Bei wasn't the kind of person who didn't know how to distinguish between food and water. Compared to the person in front of him, Su Bei was much more intelligent. At the very least, Su Bei wouldn't spout nonsense that was even more absurd than, "Why don't you eat minced meat?" Jiang Pingji didn't seem to notice Han Yu's pale face. She said, "I know you think what I said is ridiculous, but Wenbin, never limit your imagination. What you think is absurd may not necessarily be non-existent. What I am talking about is the future." Han Yu sneered and changed the topic in a stiff tone. "What's the second?" "The second is the common people. There's nothing much to say about the specifics, but it can be summed up in 4 words: awakening the wisdom of the people. You also know that the valuable books are almost monopolized by the landowning families. It is no different from a fantasy for the common people to want to study and learn to read. If they don't have special opportunities, they can only recognize 2 words at most. It is impossible for them to reach the level of great talent. If one day ordinary people can afford to buy books and go to the academy, it won't be long before the wisdom of the people is awakened." Jiang Pingji followed Han Yu's advice and said, "Of course, according to Wenbin's idea, if everyone studies, no one would be willing to be a farmer with his back to the sky. Then the fields will be wasted." The corner of Han Yu's mouth and the tip of his eyebrows twitched. Wasn't the guy in front of him saying so much to recruit him? Was this a recruitment or a feud? Insulting him to his face, was this really a man of character? Han Yu snorted coldly and did not comment. However, he had nothing to complain about Jiang Pingji's explanation of the common people. Whether it was the establishment of the Golden Scale Pavilion or the Golden Scale Academy, or even the exploration of a new educational model, these were all the sincerity that she had displayed. She used her actions to fulfill her promise of enlightening the people. There was nothing to be picky about. Jiang Pingji continued, "But to put it bluntly, once the people are enlightened, the country will welcome a revolution. Since ancient times, the emperors had always said that they wanted to enlighten the people, but in reality, none of them really wanted the people to be enlightened. Not only was he worried that everyone would study instead of plowing the fields, he was even more afraid that after the common people gained wisdom, their hearts would be unbalanced. Nobles, generals, and ministers, do they all have guts? Why were the people on the dragon throne born to be emperors, but he was born to be farmers? Once they have this idea, the toppling of the country is only a matter of time. Han Yu's body trembled after hearing that. His eyes were wide open and his face was full of disbelief. Jiang Pingji smiled. But I'm not afraid. Han Yu withdrew his previous comment. How could a person with such insight be a little naive person who did not know how to do physical work and could not distinguish between the 5 grains? Everyone loves power, but is it really that tempting? Jiang Pingji sneered with disdain. Unifying the world and ascending the throne are my tasks to achieve my goals, but it is not my ultimate goal. Enlightening the people is just a part of the plan. I'm not afraid that the people will overthrow the dynasty. Because the outdated products that are not suitable for the time should be eliminated. Jiang Pingji's words were a little hard for Han Yu to understand. He was a little confused. But if he understood it literally, he could barely understand 30% of it. Jiang Pingji said, the above 2 points can't be separated from the third point, technology. Technology? What is it? Han Yu was confused. There was no such word in this era. He had never heard of it. Jiang Pingji simply used a word that Han Yu could understand to describe it. It is similar to the study of things to gain knowledge, but they are different. Han Yu frowned and listened carefully. At that moment he forgot to find fault with her. The method of technology is the star-encompassing nature. Irrigation and water conservancy can be called technology, and so can natural craftsmanship. It is the combination of skills and theories. Jiang Pingji continued, I just said that one person can support thousands of people and cultivate hundreds of thousands of acres of land. I didn't make it up. If technology is sufficient, it will be realized. When the land, the people, and technology reach the level I mentioned, the revolution will come. That is the time when the law will come. The power of the king is lower than the law, and the king is more afraid of the law. The gentry and nobles are no longer unreachable, and the people can punish their mistakes with the law. That is in the future, not now. Han Yu's face turned pale as he listened to Jiang Pingji's last words. Jiang Pingji said, I know what Wenbin is pursuing. I can understand it. But Wenbin, you have to ask yourself, is this a good time to put the law in your heart into practice? Even if I support you with all my strength, the gentry and nobles will not spare you. If you fail, your law will naturally become a piece of paper. It is like a mirage. You can see the shadow with your eyes, but you can't touch the real thing with your hands. It was not hard to imagine how Han Yu felt when his law was denied by Jiang Pingji. He said angrily, How eloquent you are, Master Lanting. Are you trying to flatter me? Han Yu's law was different from the law of the legalists. The law he wanted was true justice and no special privileges were allowed. Jiang Pingji reached out her hand to him. Han Yu was stunned. You can't realize it now, but you can lay the foundation for those who can. That is the inheritance. Jiang Pingji said, I will never be able to achieve what I want in this life because it will take too long to realize it. However, I can pass on this ambition to my successor. Isn't it because the withered leaves of the old trees nourish the soil? Wenbin, your ambition is unbearable in this era. If you are not careful. No, I should say that there is no suspense. If you try to realize it, you will die without a whole corpse. Han Yu said, If I can be martyred, my life will not be in vain. Isn't the original intention of pursuing law to bring peace to the world with law? The time is not ripe yet. What you do will only cause turmoil. Isn't that putting the cart before the horse? Jiang Pingji said, The path of law is broad and profound. You may not be able to see all of it even if you spend your whole life. Isn't it better to be down to earth and take one step at a time? Ideals and reality are always different. Han Yu was silent. He thought that Jiang Pingji was naive, but now he realized that he was the naive one. I have one more question. Can you answer it, Master Lanting? Jiang Pingji said, Go ahead. Han Yu said, I rarely discuss with others. Few people know about it. How do you know about it? Jiang Pingji was speechless. I can't hide it anymore. Chapter 1205. Before Jiang Pingji betrayed Wuxia, Han Yu smiled knowingly. He said in a declarative tone, It should be Zixiao, right? I can't think of a second candidate other than him. Jiang Pingji said embarrassedly, Zixiao did remind me that if I want to recruit you, it's better to deal with the problem. Han Yu was speechless. The scene was very awkward, as if 2 or 3 fallen leaves were blown by the autumn wind. Jingqi Bai, streamer, destined to be alone. Xinyuan Mingjing, streamer, single dog. The idol audience's daily routine was to criticize Jiang Pingji. If they did not criticize her for a day, they would feel uncomfortable. If criticizing others was also a kind of love, their love for Jiang Pingji was absolutely true. Beating was a sign of affection, scolding was a sign of love. If they loved her, they would criticize her. Thus, Jiang Pingji saw the screen full of mockery. Can't be cooked, Ci Marin. You betrayed me and still want to cook me? Heartless woman, you can spend the rest of your life with your right hand. The Fairy Queen's crimson. I'm smiling on the outside, but I'm cursing in my heart. Yi Wu Yanling. This story tells us that there is a reason why the streamer hasn't been able to make Ci Marin surrender willingly. Yao Yun. I really want to call Ci Marin and let him see someone's true colors. Han Yu naturally did not have as rich a psychological reaction as the idol audience, but he was also very upset. Master Lanting, you're quite frank. How could she tell such a big truth to the person involved? Even if it was a lie, she had to hide it. She confessed everything without hesitation. How could Han Yu continue? Wasn't she afraid that he would be dissatisfied and suspect that what she said was all false? Honesty, that's my strength. Jiang Pingji said, I can hide it for a while, but I can't hide it forever. Zixiao did help me, so there's nothing to hide. What I said just now was also from the bottom of my heart. I can judge whether it's true or false. Why should I dig a hole for myself and bury the hidden danger of distrust? We've already told each other everything. Some things shouldn't be hidden. Trust is very important. Jiang Pingji was the most shameless one. She was not stingy with putting gold on her face. She blew her own trumpet without even writing a draft. The grudge in Han Yu's heart vanished. He immediately smiled bitterly. He finally understood why Su Bei had lost to this woman before him. In terms of scheming, Su Bei was far inferior to her. Not to mention in other areas he was a complete failure. It was not shameful to lose to her. Han Yu muttered to himself for a long time, as if he was struggling internally for the last time. Jiang Pingji didn't say anything to disturb him. Instead, she sat upright. She had already predicted Han Yu's choice. As expected, Han Yu got up from the mat, walked to the side and bowed deeply to Jiang Pingji. Han Wenbin from Langia pays respect to my lord. Jiang Pingji stood up and helped him up. The audience in the streaming room spontaneously sent congratulatory messages to both of them. Jin Yeye. Congratulations to Master Jiang for winning the limited edition, Han Yu? Maserati. Zhangxue Shijin. Congratulations to exploiter Jiang for successfully tricking Han Yu into working overtime for free. Jiang Pingji was speechless. These salted fish must be itching to be naughty a few times a day, right? Fortunately, Jiang Pingji was a well-trained genetic warrior. If it was someone else, they would have long been annoyed by the salted fish audience. Losing self-control was a small matter. What she was afraid of was being suspected of being possessed by a ghost or being followed by something evil. After surrendering, Han Yu finally regained his freedom. Only then did he hear the news that Cheng Sun had committed suicide by hitting his head against the wall. Gong Luo He. Sigh, what a pity. According to Han Yu's understanding of Cheng Sun, it was expected that he would make such a drastic decision. Apart from those extreme and old-fashioned ideas, Han Yu still admired Cheng Sun. Even if Su Bei helped Cheng Sun divide his power, it didn't affect Han Yu's appreciation for talent. A pity? Jiang Pingji said, what kind of person is Cheng Sun? Does Wenbin admire him? Regardless of his standpoint and beliefs, Gong Luo is indeed a talent worthy of admiration. It's a pity that his family background has dragged him down. Han Yu's gaze seemed calm, but there was a faint sadness in his eyes that quickly disappeared. Gong Luo has been blessed by his clan since he was young. It's inevitable for him to be biased because of his family background. However, he can't see through the root cause of the chaos in the world. He's too arrogant and is easily frustrated. Cheng Sun was a standard descendant of the gentry family. At the same time, he was the epitome of this group. Biased because of his family background? Jiang Pingji raised her eyebrows. Does that mean he hates me? Jiang Pingji's identity to the public was a descendant of the Liu family in Hejian. Her family background wasn't considered first-rate, but it was considered second-rate. She mingled with the commoners all day long. For the decent descendants of the gentry family, Jiang Pingji was a detestable oddity. My lord, you don't have to belittle yourself. As a ruler, you must have a broad mind that can accommodate all. It's difficult to achieve great things if you're confined to the gentry family. Jiang Pingji sneered. Belittle myself? Cheng Sun wasn't qualified. I'm belittling myself? Cheng Sun hates me, then so be it. He's not the only one who hates me. It doesn't matter if there's one more or one less. I can understand him. The gentry family and the commoners are two distinct social classes. To put it bluntly, the former are the sons of the rich who were born with a silver spoon in their mouths. They have everything they need. The latter are the beggars who were born in poverty. They have to worry about their next meal. One day the beggars can become officials in the same court as the sons of the rich. The former can even surpass the latter. Isn't it a humiliation for the sons of the rich? I'm not surprised that Cheng Sun is so arrogant that he made a radical move because he couldn't stand the injustice. Han Yu was also born in the gentry family. He dared to break away from the bias because his law was fairness and equality. So, why did the person in front of him give up the advantages of being a gentry family and become entangled with the commoners? Han Yu's eyes were full of doubt, but he still asked. It's because of the saying, kings, marquises and generals all have guts, Jiang Pingji said. I only have one question for you. Are there more gentry families or commoners? Han Yu was puzzled. Chapter 1206. Jiang Pingji was very straightforward, or perhaps it could be said that she was too straightforward. She divided the whole world according to interests, but Han Yu couldn't refute her. Suddenly, a terrible idea came to Han Yu's mind. He made a very bold assumption. Is it really impossible for the gentry to completely dominate the poor? Jiang Pingji smiled. Of course there is. There is? Han Yu's heart skipped a beat. He didn't want to listen anymore. He was afraid that Jiang Pingji's words would release the most terrible beast in his heart. Of course there is. It is to fool the people with religious beliefs. Once their minds are controlled, they will be a group of pigs with no sense of resistance, not people with rebellious bones. Jiang Pingji shrugged inelegantly and looked disdainful. Tens of millions of rebellious commoners are not easy to control, but tens of millions of brainless pigs are easy to raise. However, if you really do that, you will be a sinner for all eternity. Han Yu shuddered and looked at Jiang Pingji in horror. He secretly wiped the cold sweat off his forehead. Fortunately, the person in front of him had a clear mind, or it would be too scary. The gentry want to monopolize the benefits, but they don't know how risky it is. I will not be as stupid as them. Jiang Pingji snorted coldly. It is true that there are many benefits if the nobles can get the support of the gentry, but there is no such thing as a free lunch. If you take benefits from them, you should spit out more benefits to satisfy them. I don't want to be told what to do and be controlled by others. Han Yu said, I thought that my lord was rebelling by starting your own family, but now I know that there is great wisdom behind it. Jiang Pingji said shamelessly, it is just a little trick. It is not worth mentioning. Han Yu was speechless. You are so arrogant. After a few words of praise. They talked for a while and the topic returned to Cheng Sun. On the other hand, I feel sorry for Gong Liao and Mr. Wenfu. Cheng Sun left with his old master, and although he managed to preserve his good name, I don't know how long it will take for his family members to recover from the grief of his passing. Jiang Pingji didn't have a bad impression of him. After all, she had never met him. She didn't like him or hate him. It is said that Cheng Sun has a wife and children. What a sin. Han Yu looked at Jiang Pingji strangely, as if Jiang Pingji was the strange one. Why are you looking at me? Han Yu said, my lord is kind. Jiang Pingji said, I don't believe you. I feel like there's more to it than meets the eye. Han Yu said helplessly, my lord, you have read a lot of books. Do you know that there is a saying that goes, brothers are like hands and feet and wives are like clothes? If the clothes are torn, they can still be sewn. If the hands and feet are broken, they can still be continued? Gong Luo trusted you and was willing to sacrifice himself to fulfill his loyalty. How could he live for his wife and daughter? Jiang Pingji was upset. I didn't expect you, Han Wenbin, to be such a scum. You think I'm right? I beg to differ, Han Yu said. His wife and daughter are also his blood relatives, not to mention that Gong Luo's parents are still alive. Jiang Pingji said, Wenbin has a strong desire to live. Han Yu didn't understand. He was right to be confused. Jiang Pingji had a way with words. How could he, who was in ancient times, keep up with her? This pair of newly minted ministers had a pleasant conversation, and in the eyes of outsiders, they seemed to be on good terms. Only the two of them knew how it felt. Wei Ci was relieved when he saw Han Yu appear behind Jiang Pingji. At the same time he felt that he had expected it. No matter in the previous life or this life, Han Yu was destined to be under the Lord's command. He sincerely hoped that the two of them could have a good ending in this life. Han Yu didn't have to end his life by swallowing gold and write a 10,000-word letter of apology before he died. Wei Xi didn't see the contents of the letter, but Han Yu also wrote a letter to his old friend before he committed suicide. Wei Xi understood most of the twists and turns in the letter. At that time the emperor was seriously ill. However, the political situation was not stable. She had to deal with the government affairs even though she was ill. She didn't dare to relax for even a moment. Although Han Yu's suicide was for the emperor's good, it was also a huge blow to the emperor. Han Yu's wife was born in a noble family. She was intimate with her mother's family behind Han Yu's back and conspired against the emperor. Han Yu stayed in the government office all year round to revise and compile laws. Sometimes he would go on business trips to collect case files from various places. As a middle-aged man who didn't stay at home all year round, Han Yu didn't pay attention to what was going on in the backyard. After the rebellion failed, Fu Wang led the troops to raid the residences of the offending officials. Han Yu was also involved because of his wife. Han Yu didn't participate in it, but his wife used his name and some of her connections. She couldn't wash herself clean even if she jumped into the river of motherhood. The emperor wanted to protect Han Yu, but Han Yu wrote a letter of apology at home. He admitted his crime and committed suicide by swallowing gold. Why did he do that? Because the emperor protected Han Yu. She couldn't deal with the other offending officials with confidence. She was really afraid of hurting the innocent. Han Yu admitted his crime and swallowed gold in order to let the emperor do whatever he wanted. If he was going to die, he would drag a lot of people with him. Alas, Wei Xi sighed. Han Yu's voice drifted into his ears. Zixiao, I haven't seen you for years. You've grown up. Wei Xi said readily, not as good as Wenbin. Han Yu snorted. His sarcasm was regarded as a compliment by Wei Xi. Aren't you afraid that I will really get angry? Han Yu said, I rarely discuss with others. You are one of them. It wasn't the first time that Wei Xi betrayed his good friend, but it was the first time that someone came to his door. He was a little embarrassed. My lord is very good. Wenbin will approve of her no matter what I say. Wei Xi was gentle and he quickly smoothed things over. In his previous life, the emperor took down Han Yu without Wei Xi's help. He even made Han Yu loyal to the emperor. Otherwise, why would Han Yu commit suicide by swallowing gold? Because a gentleman would die for his bosom friend. Han Yu was speechless. He had finally seen the power of a brainless fan. But Han Yu nodded. She is indeed very good. Wei Xi agreed. The two talked in a low voice. As they chatted, Wei Xi changed the topic to his family. Wei Xi mocked himself for being alone at the age of 30. At the same time, he complimented Han Yu for having a beautiful wife and a son and a daughter. Han Yu didn't think there was anything wrong with the topic. Wei Xi soon got the information he wanted. His heart sank. Han Yu caught the emotion that flashed in his eyes. Han Yu asked, is there something wrong? After all, they were from the same sect. Han Yu naturally knew that Wei Xi was a fraud. The key was that this fraud was not a liar who talked nonsense. He was a real talent. Wei Xi said, there is something wrong with my sister-in-law. It's not a big problem. It's just, Han Yu asked, what's wrong? Wei Xi said, be careful of your wife's family. He had learned physiognomy and showed it to Han Yu in his previous life. But at that time he was confused. He vaguely noticed that Han Yu would do something bad, but he didn't know why. In this life he saw it clearly. Of course he had to remind Han Yu. Han Yu frowned. He turned to Jiang Pingji, but he didn't think about his wife's family. But, is it a big problem? Wei Xi said, it concerns your family's life. One mistake and you will die. It's never a bad thing to be careful. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.